Senate Chamber. Signed. 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 Senate Chamber. signed, Senate Chamber, 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 signed, Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.
Invite any members of the public into the room. Okay, so you're just okay. Okay, I declare the meeting open to the public, and I welcome all members to the 59th meeting of the Public Accounts Committee in this mandate. I also advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. However, there could be a delay between moving to any private session or back into public, so please be patient with the system. Those joining us in the public gallery are very welcome to use their mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted. You can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi. Password can be found in the gallery rules, and it is not permitted at any time to take pictures or record any part of today's meeting. We have no apologies at present. John Burrows, MLA, will join us shortly, and online we have Patrick Delargy, MLA. Can I refer members to the pack for a copy of the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of December 2025 at pages 6 to 11 of the meeting pack. Obviously, members, I wasn't present. Are members content that that is an accurate reflection of the minutes? I'll ask Diane, who chaired the proceedings, to sign the minutes, so we're all above board. Okay, members, can I also remind you to ensure that you've considered the full agenda for the meeting and that any relevant declarations are made early in the meeting to ensure that they're recorded in open session. With that said, can I ask if members have any relevant declaration of interest to declare? Dan?
Yeah, APS to the Education Minister.
Okay, thank you. Patrick?
Chair, former teacher, and then also chair of the All Party Group on Mental Health.
Okay, good. Anyone else? No? Okay. Thank you, members. Chairperson's business. Can I first of all put on record my sincere appreciation to our Vice Chair, Diane Forsyth, for chairing the meetings over the course of the last number of months, and for her kind assistance and for stepping in at short notice. It is really appreciated. I'm told that you spoiled the members of the committee with sweets, so it sets a very high bar. And I'll tell you how much I appreciate that later. So thank you, Dan. I appreciate that very, very much. Also, two other points I'd like to, on behalf of the Public Accounts Committee, state on record our deep appreciation to Colette Keane, who has now retired as the local government auditor with the Northern Ireland Audit Office. Colette has given a lifetime of service to the Northern Ireland Audit Office and indeed our Northern Ireland public. She has rightly earned her retirement, and I do, on behalf of the committee, wish her well, but also to congratulate her on the New Year's Honours List nomination, which was successful, and again to wish her and her family well, but most importantly to thank her for the incredible service and for the dedication that she has shown over many, many years with the Northern Ireland Audit Office. And I think it would be appropriate, members, if I could propose that on behalf of the committee and the Public Accounts Committee, that we write to Colette to wish her well in the future.
Great, Chair, yeah.
Okay. We also have a further celebration. Lucia, although she'll not like me telling you this, has been with the Assembly for 25 years. She didn't know that until I told her that. But I just want to put on record our appreciation to Lucia. 25 years is a very long time, particularly when you're 30. And I think it's important to recognise the great assistance, help, guidance, support that she provides us and has provided to this Assembly over a quarter of a century. So I hope that makes you feel good. So thank you as well to Lucia. And just a further congratulations is to Yanni, who is now a permanent member of the committee team. Congratulations, Yanni. You're a fantastic and important part of the team, and we do appreciate deeply your assistance. So you'll gel well, as always, with the others and helping the committee do the work that we do. So congratulations. And to the rest of you, thanks for keeping the boat afloat whilst I was not here. And Happy New Year to each and every one of you as well. We have a lot ahead of us, and I'm looking forward to the challenges that are there, and there will be many. But I know that this committee will continue putting political differences and agendas aside to focus on what is important, which is looking after public money and ensuring value for public money. So thank you to everyone. We also have, members, the Royal College of General Practitioners in Northern Ireland has written to the clerk seeking a meeting with the Chair and Deputy Chair to discuss the recommendations made in the report on access to general practice in Northern Ireland. A copy of the email can be found at pages 14 of the meeting pack. Can I suggest that we respond to them to suggest that a meeting be arranged following receipt of consideration of the MOR for the report, which is entirely appropriate. This will allow for a more meaningful discussion on the basis of the Department of Health's response to the recommendations in the report. So we are in agreement to have the meeting, but timing is important, and we'll wait until we have such responses so that our meeting has merit. Are members in agreement with that suggestion?
Great.
Okay, thank you. Members, at pages 16 to 36 of the meeting pack is correspondence that has been received from the Northern Ireland Housing Executive and Department for Communities following the recent evidence session on homelessness in Northern Ireland. Can I seek agreement to note this correspondence for inclusion in the final report?
Agreed.
Also, pages 37 of your meeting pack is correspondence from the Department of Finance confirming that Accounting Officer Neil Gibson will attend to brief members regarding MORs on the 29th of January. Are members content to note that correspondence? Also, members, at pages 38 to 57 of the meeting packets of correspondence that has been received from Homeless Connect following the recent evidence sessions on homelessness in Northern Ireland, and we're going to note that as well. Okay?
Right.
I didn't read that right now. Okay. At agenda item 6, we'll go through correspondence. At pages 59 to 65 of the pack is further correspondence dated the 10th of December and the 11th of January 2026 from a member of the public regarding Dalradian Gold. Are you content that this matter does not fall within the remit of the Public Accounts Committee and that a response be issued to the member of the public advising them accordingly? Also at pages 66 to 73 of the pack is a written submission of evidence to the inquiry into homelessness in Northern Ireland from Action for Children in Northern Ireland. Are you content to note this submission also for inclusion in the final report?
Right.
Page 74 of the meeting pack is an invitation from the Assembly Engagement Team for the Public Accounts Committee to attend the Barr Show in 2026. Members, I had this discussion with the clerk earlier today. There's been a number of conversations at various committees in relation to what happens in the week of the Balmoral Show. It's my intention to be at the Balmoral Show on that particular day for the DERA committee. So I think it would be entirely beneficial for the committee to consider having our meeting at the Balmoral Show on that particular day. I'm conscious that there will be other committees that will not be at the Balmoral Show in the morning. Members, any particular concerns or views?
No, so we are looking at it at the minute, and potentially will be, so it would suit in that sense of doing both there, so that's okay.
Economies also, we were there last year with
Yeah.
the DERA committee, so I'm happy as part of Lagan Valley, so delighted. Yes.
We were there last year with the Finance Committee and are going to go again this year. We thought it was really beneficial. Last year we used it as an opportunity with Finance Committee to engage with the public. We were having our banking inquiry, we did a lot of surveys and things, so as well as, or instead of, whatever business we have in terms of our normal meeting, it would be a good opportunity to even raise the profile of Public Accounts Committee and say, what are you concerned on in terms of public spend without creating a monster of a survey.
I think it is good, particularly given that we have become more front-facing and engaging, and particularly at that particular time, the inquiry into waste will be live, and a lot of the relevant stakeholders will be there. So I think it is a good opportunity. So with that said, members, I'm reading that we're content to confirm that the Public Accounts Committee will be attending the Balmoral Show. Are we content to have the timings around the usual meeting time as well?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, agenda item 7 is the Ministerial Direction on the HSE Pay Award. At this juncture, we'll welcome Dorinnia, Comptroller and Auditor General, to the witness table. Can I refer members to the Ministerial Direction in respect of the HSE Pay Award? It's at page 76 to 130 of the pack. Dorinnia, you're very welcome. Happy New Year to you and your team.
Happy New Year.
And hopefully you'll pass on our sentiments to Colette.
I will, thank you.
We'll formally be writing to her, but it's important, obviously, to mark a significant contribution, and obviously to wish her replacement well in his new exciting role with a very dynamic team. So we look forward to engaging with him as well. So with that said, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. So I'm presenting to you today a ministerial direction in relation to the 25-26 HSE Pay Awards. So the accounting officer from the Department of Health wrote to me on the 18th of November last year to advise that the Minister of Health had issued a ministerial direction in May 25 to implement pay awards as recommended by the pay review bodies. On the 6th of November 25, then the Executive approved that ministerial direction and approved the implementation of a pay award to the HSE workforce costing £209 million. Why this direction was sought, the accounting officer advised that he and his officials were seeking a ministerial direction because they could not construct a case that meets the requirement of managing public money for affordability, that it was incompatible with agreed spending budgets at that time, and that is one of the areas within managing public money that an accounting officer should seek a direction. In the submission from the department, 3 options were outlined for the Minister's consideration, and they are laid out for you. And it was then recommended by the department to proceed with option 3, which was meeting the pay reviews bodies in full. And it is slightly unusual for a department to recommend proceeding with an option. But it was stated very clearly in the correspondence, which is included, the rationale for that, and again stated very clearly that a ministerial direction would be required on that basis. So you'll see in my letter I have outlined for you the steps taken by the department. They do correspond with the steps required to be taken under managing public money, and so I bring this to your attention today, members. All of the appropriate annexes are included, and so in summary, ministerial direction was issued, approved by the executive for a pay award costing an additional £209 million.
Thank you. An interesting one. I've looked at this and I did find it quite peculiar that the accounting officer was recommending and in agreement with the ministerial directions. Bit of a strange situation, to be honest. Pay awards has been a problem. It's not a new issue. It's been in the background for some time. Is there any particular reason why the HSE pay awards were not adequately planned for within the budget of the department? Did they give you any clarification in relation to that? No.
No, I didn't. What we can see from the correspondence is that a percentage had been included within the budget, but it wasn't then the percentage that was either agreed by the pay review bodies in GB, or in fact it was not the percentage that was put forward under negotiation. So an amount had been budgeted for, but then again the ask was in excess of that.
By a significant amount?
Yes, yeah, so I think 2.8% had been included in the budgets, but at the point in time as well, Health were already anticipating that they had a funding gap at that point in time as well.
In terms of the mechanics of the process around this MOR, I'm a bit confused because an MOR comes into effect that allows the Minister to make, if you like, a political decision almost in terms of going off on their own. But this particular MOR, ministerial direction, has been agreed. The ministerial direction has been agreed by the Permanent Secretary. The consequences of that, so the reason that they wouldn't pursue the normal channel for this was because it was unaffordable. Isn't that right? So
that's why the direction was sought.
Is it a bit contradictory then for the direction to be sought in the same vein, given that the Permanent Secretary or the Accounting Officer was in support of the ministerial direction?
It's certainly unusual. We haven't seen that before. A ministerial direction ordinarily arrives where an accounting officer is recommending a course of action that is contrary to that of the minister. This one's slightly unusual in that a number of options were being considered, but for an option to proceed outside on an unaffordable basis, I guess the accounting officer clearly states in the paperwork that a ministerial direction would be required because he cannot act without one. He doesn't have the budget to do so. That said, he outlines his reasons for recommending option 3, being reasons to do with avoiding industrial action in the main.
Yes, but the consequences of it results in an overspend by the department. So is it the normal process that the department would then commit to repay that overspend? What happens in that situation?
That's not something that I could answer for you, Chair. That's not something, I think, it's not a situation we've been in before. So
it is quite clear. Pay awards across all departments are an issue. We hear about it every single week. If all permanent secretaries, accounting officers, took a similar approach to this particular accounting officer, it would paint a very difficult financial picture for this place if all departments overspend and don't repay the overspend. That certainly puts this place in a very precarious financial situation. In fact, is it not the legal responsibility of the accounting officer to ensure that they come in within budget?
Yes, it is, and that's why I think a direction is sought where you, but as I say, the slightly unusual piece here is that the recommendation was to proceed with the option, but very clearly stating that a direction would be required to proceed with that option.
It is a strange situation. If every department took that attitude, with the support of their permanent secretary to the minister, there's the potential to bankrupt Northern Ireland, really. So that's worrying. There needs to be questions asked in relation to that. Is it appropriate to take away this? Okay. Anyone else, anything on this? Okay, Dan?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much to CNAG for being here to speak to this. In terms of the ministerial direction and you bringing it to us here, thank you for that. In terms of the procedural piece of it then, so are you saying that in terms of what happened here, it's all compliant then with what was required in managing public money?
Yeah, so it is then the steps that are taken, the steps that I've taken outlined for you are in accordance with managing public money. I guess a more straightforward ministerial direction could be agreed by the Minister pertaining to that department. It then has to go to the Minister for Finance. The Minister for Finance, in this case, did not require or wrote back to say he wasn't required to give approval because in fact the executive, it went for cross-party cross-executive approval. So on that basis and that is allowed and laid out in managing public money, so steps taken have been followed. Yeah.
Thank you. And obviously the executive took the decision to support the public sector workers and meet pay parity for our health sector workers here in Northern Ireland. But in terms of the procedure coming through, obviously for the Department of Health, this is going to leave the 25-26 year then with this significant overspend. So in terms of whenever you're coming in to scrutinise on this and then our role on it, will that then be subject to, within your financial audit, a review around financial governance and like the access vote report? Will we expect to see that coming through with a bit more detail that way?
So, that's where I've said in this, I will keep this matter under review in 25-26. Obviously, I don't know what the full year's health spending would be. From the paperwork that is attached, you can see in numerous pieces of paperwork that was put to the Minister at the time that the accounting officer is stressing their concerns around their health budget. So I guess it does lead you to anticipate a real possibility of excess vote. Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Chair, and Happy New Year, and you're welcome back.
Thank you.
Just trying to get a better on. I mean, obviously it's compliant and all of that, so it's fine. The issue first, because it's now come, and it's very hard to get away from the statutory committee thinking here, because people are entitled to the pay, and we're not arguing that point. But for ourselves as a committee going forward, there's a precedent been set here, right? Mm-hmm. In effect, and I'm just wondering where we go as a committee then. The ramifications of the outworkings of that, and I know you're going to keep an eye on it, but the potential and all of that, you know what I mean, because no matter whether we potentially agree with the decision or disagree with it as individual MLAs, it's just how we deal with going forward in the future if that case was to rise again. And having said, I take it we haven't looked across other jurisdictions to see if this ever happened before or not, so it's a new learning for us, is it?
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to speak to other jurisdictions. I guess the difficulty, in some respects, the questions you raise are looking to the future. The nature of my work is to look at money that has been spent, and then therefore the nature of the work of this committee is almost looking backwards as well. Whether or not you did wish to ask one of the statutory committees to ask some questions around the budgetary implications going forward. The finance committee, for example, might wish to refer it there to consider the impact going forward on the budgets.
No, appreciate it.
The nature of my work will be to look backwards.
And I actually asked in that context because you could be sitting here in 12 months' time or 6 months' time, yes, having the same conversation with something else, with the same, and it's just for ourselves how we work at it. that's why I threw it out there to see if there's any idea.
Yeah.
Or maybe look towards other jurisdictions to see if there's anything like this happened before or not. I mean, that's just presented that question, Chair.
Yeah, it is posed questions a variety of ways. Colin?
The other thing, sorry, just to add, is you will recall we had we published a ministerial directions report. Northern Ireland is somewhat of an outlier across the UK and Ireland jurisdictions in terms of the number of ministerial directions issued here. But that report is a couple of years out of date at this point. But certainly Northern Ireland was grossly different in that vein.
I suppose it's just a comment really, Chair, and I suppose it underscores the dire financial situation more generally. And I suppose furthermore that the impact of austerity has had, and also the impact of decades of underinvestment in fundamental services, and just the fact that even though the financial settlement has been moved forward in terms of moving up to the 1.24, there's also an argument around whether that's 1.28, and none of that takes into account the impact of underinvestment that is incrementally playing into public services here in general. I just think it underlines that.
Yeah, there's no doubt that there are financial pressures on departments, but that doesn't give departments a by ball to overspend and put the departments into an even more difficult financial situation in the year ahead. So I accept, yes, that there's pressures there, but the pay issue has been rumbling on and on and on. Surely it's not, Dorinnia, surely it's not best practice for the Permanent Secretary to say not, like to be in support of that ministerial direction. Should he not be apart from that a wee bit and allow? I know it's compliant with spending public money, but
the process is compliant, and it does say in managing public money that an accounting officer. A ministerial direction ordinarily arises from an objection, where an accounting officer is being directed by their minister. And I suppose, as I say, this is the first one certainly that I have seen where it's just slightly unusual that the paperwork that is being provided to me gives a range of options to the minister, including one, which is unaffordable. At all stages, though, of that paperwork, anything that is unaffordable is pointed out to the minister, and the rationale for proceeding, I guess, with unaffordable options are pointed out to the minister as well. But yes, it is certainly unusual and not something I've seen before.
Yeah, that's the concern. So with that said, then, in your professional opinion, what risks does this pose, this sort of an approach pose to financial accountability and control?
Well, certainly there is a concern here around the overspend, which is pointed out, how that will be managed going forward. There is that risk of excess vote, and ultimately then when you look how that will impact on the block as well. But I suppose I don't audit the budgets and that budgetary position until it makes its way into financial statements, unfortunately. It's not until that's only when I look at it, I look at money spent. But there definitely are risks associated with a direction to overspend.
Yeah, surely it's a slightly dangerous mechanism in that it gives a minister and the department a licence to overspend. Really, that's what it's doing, and therefore it could create difficulties for this committee looking and scrutinising issues going forward.
I can't disagree with you. But that is the nature of a ministerial direction. It is a minister taking the decision, which is within their remit to do. And there are a number of other ministerial directions which I will be bringing forward to this committee. There's another two coming to you in the next couple of weeks, which again are a potential overspend position. So not from this department, I should say, from other departments as well.
Yeah, it's a trend throughout many departments, and that's what makes this even more difficult. But Tom, the peculiar part about this is a ministerial direction comes about when they don't agree with their accounting officer, in effect, or the accounting officer can't agree with the direction of travel of the minister. In this situation, we have a ministerial direction where the permanent secretary of the accounting officer is in agreement with the ministerial direction. So it is an entirely very strange situation, particularly from an accountability point of view. Diane, and then with Carville.
Thank you, Chair. The CNIG was saying about, referring it maybe to statutory committees to make sure that it's getting, the detailed attention in reference to, to the Finance Committee. I would suggest perhaps even, as well as highlighting the budgetary implications of this Finance Committee, the Health Committee, because that's where the detailed scrutiny of the proposed multi-year budget will be for the Department of Health, and where it's baselined at, if it's the procedure that has gone through to end this year, as outlined by the Chair, the unusual circumstance where the accounting officer and the minister have took this approach. Perhaps the committee, the Health Committee's well placed to get into the detail of that, and then how that moves forward would be my proposal.
Yeah, I think that's a fair enough proposal. My concern around the safeguarding of, if you could use that word loosely, the checks and balances here. If the accounting officer should be ensuring that there is no overspend, not agreeing with the minister to overspend. So it's just a very peculiar situation to be in, and to be honest, one that's entirely unacceptable. Just doesn't. It's not appropriate. Cahill?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Slightly different view on it, Chair, because I don't want people who are sitting and listening today. We didn't want these people to get their pay rise. The issue is where the Perm Sac, and in this instance, had requested, near enough requested this procedure, whatever, to ensure this pay of it. My thing is, for the PSC as a committee, how do we look at it going forward in the future? Is ever going to happen again within statute? Do we look at it from a point of view of we'll send this out to statutory committees and see what their role is in their statutory duties, scrutinising money, or we as a PSC? Because if this keeps presenting to us as a PSC and as part of our procedures and process, it's going to continue on without us being able to, we understand it and it's sitting there, but what can we do about it? I'm just wondering, is it something we need to take further advice in terms of our statutes, our duties as a PSC? It may be the standing committee's duties. I don't know. It's a difficult one, not because, Dorinnia could be back in a month's time, the same procedure, and saying the same thing. All I'm saying is, for us as a PSC, how do we deal with it going forward, if that's going to be the case? Because we've heard evidence today, it seems pretty legitimate in terms of why the reasons behind giving the pay rise, so we're not arguing that. But you're right, Chair, it's unprecedented, and it's a new pathway we're on, and I'm only trying to figure out how we deal with it as a PSC committee, a standing committee going forward. And we need probably some idea, is it in standing orders or whatever? I don't know where it lies. We just need advice on it, maybe.
I think fundamentally the core point here is that nobody around the table is disagreeing with the public pay award. I think where the frustration lies that this was not a new problem, and there was a failure within the department to sufficiently budget appropriately or accurately for the cost of this, or to offset it with something else. They just simply have overspent. They're just simply planning now to overspend. That's a problem. It's not about the pay award. Yeah. It's about how this. Yes.
Jared, this is about the Permanent Secretaries Act.
Yes, but the point I'm making is there is going to be an overspend because they're going to go beyond their budget. If they had a plan for this properly at an earlier stage, they wouldn't have been in this situation to the same degree. Would that be fair enough to say, in terms of budget, in terms of the planning of the? Because the pay award issue, similar to the Department of Education, is not a new problem. This has been going on from the Assembly returned, in fact, before that.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you, Chair. I'm saying that's the duty for statutory committee in terms of that, with the issue you've raised. This is a precedent set by Permanent Secretary. which is the role of this committee to look at. That's a slightly different matter in our role as scrutiny. All I'm saying to you is other ways do we need to take further advice if this arises again, what we can do as a committee.
Yeah.
The scrutiny role of budgets is outside. We all sit in other committees, which is their statutory duty. I think this is slightly different, but that's my own thinking. Maybe I'm wrong with that. But
well, the dangerous precedent that's been set here is that if all other departments and permanent secretaries take a similar approach, there's a very serious problem that's going to emerge next year. And all departments have the same challenges and pressures in a different sort of a way, but the pay issue is a major issue across the entire public service. And if permanent secretaries follow in this vein with the department, there's going to be a big problem.
Well,
and our role here is to scrutinise public expenditure. And basically, from what we're seeing right now, they're spending money they don't even have. That's the problem. David?
Yeah.
Okay, I suppose it's the bit that this is not about the frontline staff are the ones that's we're not getting into that at all. The pay they've got is exactly what they deserve to be paid, and that's nobody's arguing with that. The bit I'm concerned about is this was always going to happen because it was actually over budget before even what they built in was already over budget at the very start. So why would anybody else ever budget? This is just add. There's no reform ever happening here. This is just add more, and we'll just do a ministerial direction. So the concern I have is every department will just do exactly the same, because why would I try and make within my budget if they can just do whatever they want? And is there a point where the budget's at the start? We're retrospectively looking back, if you like. Is there a point at the start that the budget has to be? What's the mechanism there to make sure to stop this happening at the beginning rather than looking at it? Is there anything we can do at that point?
Maybe for the clerk to answer that, but I think you probably are getting into the role of statutory committees who scrutinise the budgets looking forward. This is
make myself clear, but we're moving
backwards.
We're moving.
Yes, this committee needs to be clear about its role.
Yes.
Yeah.
The point is in relation to public expenditure, and we'll seek further clarification. We have the TOA with us next week.
Yeah.
We're looking forward to that, Stuart, and we have a number of questions that we'll put to you in relation to these matters. Dorinnia or Lucia, do you want in there?
No, it was just to say that this is very unusual, and PAC's role really is really to generally to after the CNIG's looked at it, it comes to PAC, they note it. But as you say, it's sort of raised a few issues that hasn't been across this table before. So I think it would only be fair to say that I will take it away, I'll discuss it with my colleagues, and come back with some further information on, because there is the line between what PAC does and then passing it on to a statutory committee. So I'll certainly be consulting with the clerk of the finance committee and my clerk assistant, and we'll come back with some further advice.
And of course we'll have the TOA next week. So, Dorinnia, have you anything else? Or are you happy?
No, I think that's fair enough. And just to say, there are other ministerial directions coming as well. Yep. So I think it is. I shouldn't laugh.
Apologies for that meeting, Chair.
Yeah, but considering them in conjunction with that advice from other committees, I think would be worthwhile for you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Members, we'll move on now to agenda item 8, which is MOR managing the Schools Estate and Development Skills for Northern Ireland's Future. Dorinnia staying with us, joined by Patrick Barr from the Northern Ireland Audit Office. Members will consider the update on the MOR and manage the Schools Estate following the publication of our PAC report on the 16th of October 2025. Can I refer members to the relevant documentation? Clerk's memo was at 132 to 136 of your packs, and the Memorandum of Reply is at pages 137 to 150. I'll ask Lucia to brief members now. Thank you, Lucia.
Chair, could I just indicate maybe interest as Chair of Communities Committee, just in relation to this item.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So the brief that you have before you, I'll just sort of go through some of the highlights, and then there's a table which gives more detail on the key points in relation to that. But the first thing I think to say is, in summary, 8 recommendations have been accepted. 2 partially accepted and 1 not accepted. The MOR clearly sets out the DE position in response to the recommendations, and including any actions that have already been undertaken or planned. Of the 11 recommendations made by the committee, the table goes into more detail, but in summary, 6 are adequately addressed, so that they're highlighted in green. 1 has been partially addressed, which is in amber, and 4 remain not as fully answered or not accepted, and those are in red. So if you just refer to the table, you'll be able to get more detail on that. It is reassuring to see that it's anticipated that the maintenance backlog will be fully addressed in the next financial year. However, in the absence of a preventative maintenance programme, the department remains on a reactive footing, resulting in ongoing concerns over health and safety of building users, increasing disruption for staff and pupils, and ultimately a greater cost to the public purse. A review of governance arrangements has been completed, and you'll see that an estate strategy is due to be completed in March 2026. However, there still remains questions over the deliverability of the strategy, and you'll find more detail for each of the recommendations and suggested actions to take on the back of that. Just would be worth highlighting, for example, recommendation 3 on condition surveys. That's been partially accepted. The current 5-year cycle of condition surveys is on track to be completed on schedule. However, members might wish to seek further information on the timescales as to whether it's 5 years or 3 years. If you recall, in the Audit Office report, there was some question over the 3-year over 5-year cycles, but you'll see the details there, and that one's been highlighted in amber. So I think overall the MOR shows that there's been progress made against many of the recommendations, but questions remain in respect of some of the critical areas, including the condition survey cycle, preventative maintenance, climate obligations, and the deliverability of the SEN provision against a significant funding gap.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Members, I'm sure you agree it is reassuring to a degree that plans are in place to address the maintenance backlog, but it is concerning that there are still no plans to deliver a preventative maintenance programme. So this is going to result inevitably in a continuing decline of the condition of the school's estate, which will end up costing more money in the long run. It's got substantial financial implications as well as wider consequences for the children and staff of our school's estate. The department does emphasise throughout the response that delivery of much of the required work remains subject to availability of funding. It's a standard response now when it comes to departments. Given ongoing financial restraints across the public sector, this calls into question the deliverability of this particular strategy. And I do believe that this committee, through our evidence sessions and the work of the inquiry, did produce fairly strong recommendations. I note that they have accepted most, but partially accepted 2 and not accepted 1. The other challenges as well, the climate obligations as written in legislation, I don't believe the department will be able to satisfy. We know the cost of that from our inquiry and the implications of trying to meet those standards, and it's given the financial position, you could probably understand why that would not be achievable. But nonetheless, the situation is going to continue to deteriorate and worsen, and ultimately cost more in the long run to repair or catch up. But more so, in the midst of all this, we do have children and staff in schools that are in buildings that are not up to standard, fit for purpose, some degree maybe even safe, if we have no measurement of that is accurate in terms of time. Members and views, Diane?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This, I think, we put, as you say, we put a lot of work into this report. We all had really strong examples from each of our constituencies of extreme challenges at the school estate and just some of the lack of data. And it is good to see the recommendations all accepted in principle.
Yeah.
But for those that are green, I would support the comments made from the clerk in terms of there was 2 or 3 things there about where we may wish to seek a little bit further more information and clarity. I think in particular the lack of an overriding strategy was really concerning, and it'll be great to see it put into place. But as the clerk said, it would be good to be able to see what those costings might look like, what's actually achievable, and it would be good that the outworkings of our work here in this committee could show something to members of the public that actually there will be things that will be achieved and a little bit of progress coming through. And as well, under recommendation 3, I would agree with the clerk's comment where they're talking about the cycle of condition surveys is on track to be completed on schedule. It would be good to know when that on schedule was. So I would support all the points raised by the clerk in terms of getting a little bit more information on that. And a number of these have commitments saying things will be done in March 2026, which is just a couple of months away. So it would be good to have a check-in as to that in March.
To track it, that's good. Anyone else? So there's a number of follow-ups that I would suggest from the department. The views on deliverability of the strategy given the current funding position, what contingencies are in place in the event of the required funding not being available would be one. What governance arrangements are in place at accounting officer level for the delivery of the estate strategy would be another. Can the department clarify their position on the condition survey cycle given the MOA referred to in the Northern Ireland Audit Office report, which stated that in 2018 there was an undertaking by the department to move to a 3-year cycle? So seek clarification on that. We should also, if members are in agreement, seek a copy of the strategy for handbacks. Also, further information regarding the cost of vacant properties and reasons for non-disposal, given the potential to raise revenue and reduce costs. And we've all given examples of where that's happening in our constituencies and the pace, the slow pace at which that happens. We could seek a further update in 6 months' time on the implementation of the IWMS and the Delegated Maintenance Pilot Scheme. So there's a number of things there. Our members agreed with those suggestions, first of all. We seek clarification on those matters. And is anyone else anything that they would like to suggest we add to that? All content?
Yep.
All good?
Yeah, I suppose the only thing I would add to that, maybe in relation to the recommendation 6, which was not accepted, and it's listening to your earlier conversations around budgets. The point being made in this recommendation is that a maintenance plan cannot be enacted because there is no budgets, but the department then go on to say that they will continue to seek additional funding. It might be worth asking on what basis will they be making a bid for additional funding if they don't have a plan for what they wish to spend that on.
Yeah. Members happy enough?
Yeah.
Okay. Patrick, you anything? No, happy enough? Yeah.
No, I think also on the sustainability issue, trying to understand, accept the funding point, but trying to understand what the plan would be. I think the language, the climate action plan, maybe led to a bit of a confusion. I mean, really what we're looking for is some indicators to show that the sustainability position of the estate is improving annually. So they needn't be a whole climate action plan, but just some indicators that show that progress is being made annually.
I suppose to add to that, there is quite a number of new builds by the department. Within my own constituency, Stroul, Tom will be aware of this. Those buildings are being constructed today in real time. Won't be compliant with the standard under the legislation. So that should not be happening. So is there merit in, I suppose, adding a further question that in any future plan for new builds, that due consideration be given to ensure that the bill is compliant with the requirements of the climate legislation?
We mentioned a recommendation to make sure that everything from now is compliant, but I think it's that incremental progress. I accept that to do everything all at once is a huge cost, that funding doesn't exist, but to incrementally move towards improving the current estate and making sure any future estate is compliant.
Just for the sake of public record, because we're in open session and those listening won't be familiar with the background, the value of the school estate at present is what?
4.6 billion.
4.6 billion, yeah. And the cost of ensuring schools are compliant with the climate legislation is estimated to be what?
Estimate was around 2 billion.
Yeah, but they
value almost of the school's estate.
Caveated that with it wasn't a reliable estimate. Yeah. So I think we said in our report it was likely to be in excess of that.
Yes. I mentioned Stroll already, but it's a good example because it's been constructed now in real time as we speak, and it's not going to be constructed in compliance with the legislation. So ultimately, in order to be compliant, it'll have to be retrofitted, which is a duplication and a cost and spend and waste of public money when it should have been planned for beforehand. So the system is just slow to catch up with itself, really. Yeah, those are worrying figures, but you can see, obviously, with the current financial climate, that it would be very difficult to meet the expectations of the requirements of the Okay, are members content with the follow-up questions? All right, thank you, members. Thank you, Dorinnia and Patrick.
Thank you.
Okay, then, members, can we seek agreement to write to the Department with the follow-up questions as agreed? Okay, we'll now consider the update on the MOR on developing the skills for Non-Ireland's future, which was previously considered in October. Following which, this committee wrote to the DFE and DE with a number of follow-up questions. Can I refer members to the relevant documentation in your packs? The clerk's memo was at pages 151 to 153. Letter from the Department for Economy at pages 154 to 161, and Department for Education at 162 to 167. I'll ask you to brief members, please.
Okay, I'll try to be brief on the brief. So this is an update. So there's already been information back and forth on this one, developing the skills for Northern Ireland's future. So some of the follow-up questions from the committee, there was one on data sharing, which refers to recommendation 6, where members requested further information on data sharing. There were a number of things that the committee had asked for, which is outlined in your paper. The Department have confirmed that the DE Send Delivery Plan Operational Implementation Oversight Group, that's quite a long name for a group, has been commissioned to complete the scoping exercise, and they seem to be on track with what they're planning to do in relation to that. There was also a query around timelines and delivery detail for the Skills Action Plan, which is in relation to recommendations 6 and 8. So members requested for further information on the Skills Action Plan. The department have come back with quite a fulsome answer, which is again detailed in your brief. And then finally, commissioning of ETI, that's recommendation 10 in relation to the Department of Education. So members had asked for more information on the commissioning of ETI, and the department has again answered that. They've said that there will be work on the ETI evaluation on the quality of careers education in post-primary schools was commenced, and an update on the emerging findings will be available in February 2026, so not too long. Those will then be considered by the department, and any additional resources will be considered at that stage. They've also committed to a joint departmental careers action plan, That'll be published. Published in June 2025. So that may be something that, in addition to just an update further down the line, that you could request the copy of the careers action plan. But I think it would appear that they've answered most of what the committee had asked. So it's really over to you now, Chair.
Yeah, they did provide a detailed response to questions raised by the committee, which was a good enough sign. It was Jason. Any views? Everyone's content? The only follow-up that I would suggest is request a copy, as the clerk has said, of the careers action plan and seek further updates on the plan alongside the next MOR update. I think that'd be helpful.
Just to welcome that careers, that was a big one. I think that's an improvement in what we have been getting in that.
Absolutely.
So welcome that.
Okay. Members, can I seek agreement on the timing for the next MOR update is 6 months, March 2026, or 12 months, October 2026? Okay, members. We'll go for the 6th, I think. You happy with the 6th? Sorry. Can I agreed that? I agreed that in my head there and I didn't even tell you. Yeah, I think we'll go for the 6th. Yeah. Okay. Okay, members. We'll seek agreement to write to the Department informed of that decision. Okay, can we also seek agreement to forward the MOR to the Education Committee and advise them that the PAC will retain primacy as further queries have been sent to the Department for clarification? Okay, thank you. Okay, members, we're at agenda item 9, which is the Memorandum of Reply, the briefing from the Department of Health on the MOR on mental health services in Northern Ireland. Can I refer members to the clerk's briefing at pages 169 to 180 of the meeting pack? At this point, Yanni, is our witnesses with us? Yeah. Yeah, it's okay. Okay. Okay, members, can take this opportunity to welcome to the Public Accounts Committee Mike Farrar, the Accounting Officer of the Department of Health, Heather Stevens, the Director of Mental Health Services at the Department of Health, and Dr. Ciara McKillop, Interim Director of Community Care, SPPG of the Department of Health. You're all very welcome. A very happy new year to you. Welcome to the Public Accounts Committee. My congratulations on the appointment to the post. We do wish you well with all of the various challenges that exist, and we appreciate your time and being here today to take questions from us. So with that said, a number of opening remarks and then I'll pass it to yourselves, okay? So before we start, I'd like to put on record the Public Accounts Committee published its report on mental health services in Northern Ireland in June 2024, and the Department of Health has provided regular updates to the committee. However, the recommended timescales associated with the recommendations in the report continue to be extended by the Department. In light of this and the publications of the review of the deliverability of the mental health strategy in October, members are rightly concerned at the pace of progress against the recommendations made over 18 months ago, and the impact this is having on all those suffering from mental health within our communities. It is a point of great concern, not just obviously to this committee, but members across the House. This is an issue that we hear about quite often and is one of great concern. Our inquiry was a very productive inquiry, and we got a lot out of it. We engaged with quite a number of witnesses, and we produced a strong report with really strong and necessary recommendations, which we felt were entirely appropriate. We had a fairly positive launch event in this building, which was attended by the Mental Health Champion and many other guests as well, and that was appreciated. The focus of today's session will be on progress and delivery, what has been achieved to date, where timescales have changed, and how decisions to rephase actions have been taken, and what this means in practical terms to the people using mental health services in our community. Members recognise the challenging financial context, and we have been very fair as the Public Accounts Committee in recognising that departments are under immense pressure. But this session is intended to examine governance, realism and accountability for delivery. We were told by the previous accounting officer and officials of the department that mental health services and the delivery of mental health services, access to mental health services, was an absolute priority for the department. And you can appreciate how this committee would be concerned that such a statement conflicts with the action we've seen more recently. And that is a point of great concern for us. So with that said, I laid out fairly clearly where we're at, and we will have a number of questions from members, but I'll pass to yourself, Mike, to brief members as to where things are at, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Chair. So, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to come along and talk about this. I think it's hugely important as an area, and I very much share your sense of the role that mental health plays in community and its impact on a whole variety of areas. I'm joined, as you know, by Heather and Ciara, who may well come in on some of the detail. But just by way of contextualising this, when this mental health strategy was produced, Northern Ireland was spending around 52% of its allocation on its health and care budget. That had gone up from 46% in 2016 when Rafael Bengoa did systems, not structures. The point I'm making is that it looked reasonable at that time to set out an ambition to spend £1.2 billion of extra funding on mental health. Why was it sensible to do that? Because unless you get the balance right between mental, physical and social health, you will find that you are driving extra demand for physical health care and extra pressure on public services, whether that's offending, criminal justice, educational problems, by not getting that balance of expenditure right. So it's really important to understand that increasing expenditure on mental health as a proportion of our total spend is a really important aspect of resetting our health and social care system. I came to this role with the express purpose of trying to do that, simply because I don't believe, and I believe that Minister is sympathetic to me in terms of our views, whereas one of this is that we can't continue to ask Northern Ireland to spend more and more of its allocation on health and care at the expense of education, environment, policing, because they are the wider determinants of health that drive more spending in health and care. So we have effectively set out in the reset to try and manage the money that we have and to get added value within the spend that we've got. So when you go back to the mental health strategy and its introduction, which looks at funding, it is very clear. It makes it clear that effectively to implement that strategy, you would need to have more funding than the department's been allocated. So the challenge that we face here is to get better value for the money that we have. And one of the things that we are committed to doing is producing for the first time, I think in about 13 years, a set of priorities, because there is a sense, without being critical of what's gone before, which, and this committee may well have heard it, that there is a description of a number of areas as priorities. But the truth is that if you are setting something as a priority, you need to have a vehicle to deliver that. And people have worked incredibly hard to implement this strategy, which is a very good strategy, but it requires us to reset our system overall. And when you look at the aspects of our overall resetting of health and care in Northern Ireland, so we can live within that budget and allow for a broad spend on public expenditure, the areas that were covered in the strategy: prevention, earlier intervention, developing a neighbourhood model of care, which is about trying to move the focus into secondary prevention and deal with people in community settings, multidisciplinary teams, standardising care, which was the principle of the mental health regional service, in terms of taking out variability to serve Northern Ireland's population, both rural and urban. And then when you look at efficiency and value for money in terms of what we spend. So the reset itself is very consistent with delivering this strategy. And I would want to make it very clear that that reset is a holistic reset, and therefore that reset plan is about not just actually delivering access to physical care, which is one of the programme for government targets, but it's actually about improving mental health, social health, and physical health for the population in Northern Ireland. So the reset itself is very similar. Our issue is that we don't have a significant amount of resource to spend. As you know, the budgets that are set, and if we do get a 3-year budget, you can see that the percentage increase that we get is very challenging, and this year indeed we did have significant challenge. And I'll just say in passing, because I did hear the discussion about the direction, I'm very happy whilst I'm here if you want to raise anything about my intention there and procedure, but I want to make it very clear that at all stages my intention has been to manage within the resources available, and I've put great effort on that and emphasis on that, and I believe very similar to the Minister's position. So what I wanted just to say, and I'll wrap up, is that there are some very positive things that are going on, despite the fact that we would want to make faster progress. There is no doubt about that. One is to make clear that the strategy itself is right. It is exactly the right strategy, and the evidence base continues to affirm that. So we don't have to revisit, although it's 3-4 years ago. The second thing is that there are a number of things that don't require extra spending, which we can talk to you about in due course this afternoon. The third thing is that we are exploring every opportunity to find additional resource to bring into this sector. And we are looking at social financing to help complement the public sector. We're looking at R&D funding, and if we get a chance this afternoon when we talk about workforce issues and the struggle to recruit people, actually, in my experience, using R&D and investment in research is one of the ways that you can attract particularly psychiatry, but other specialties, into areas such as the far west of our patch where we are struggling. So bringing in commercial clinical trials, opportunity research is really important. And we continue to bid for transformation funding, both within Northern Ireland and on an all-island basis, to actually come alongside the money that we've got available. But the last thing I wanted to say is that we are going to be publishing our guidance in terms of priorities for the service, and we will be echoing the need to make progress in this strategy and continue to do so over the 3 years. And although this is for discussion with Minister, one of the proposals in there is to commit absolutely to spend as a proportion of our total expenditure more on mental health as we go through the 3 years. So
when will that be published?
So we're looking to publish that at the end of this month, and that will give the trusts 2 years to plan. 2 months to produce their plans for us. Sorry, it's okay.
And obviously, it'll be published in public record. Will you ensure that we are? It's brought to our attention as well.
Absolutely.
A lot of questions will focus in and around some of the things that you've touched on, but we'll go ahead and then we'll filter back. Delivery of the strategy was originally costed at 1.2 billion. You've already made reference to that cost when it was published, and to date only 12.3 million has been spent. When we took evidence from the Department in April 2024, some 18 months ago, when asked about deliverability, the then accounting officer, Peter May, said, "We have not been able to make the progress at the speed that was envisaged in 2021, and that if the budgetary challenge continues, it will be extremely difficult to deliver the strategy within a 10-year timeframe. For 2024-2025, we are looking to maintain funding in the areas that we have identified. There are a couple of areas in which we have made bids, but frankly, I am not expecting them to be met." That was said during our inquiry 18 months ago. Was the strategy ever deliverable?
I think at the time it was produced absolutely with the best of intentions, with a view that if you carried on spending at the level of growth that the health service have received historically, then it would be feasible to put new money into mental health whilst maintaining sort of other services. So my background is actually mental health. Committee members might not know, but I spent a lot of time. I closed a lot of long-stay institutions and re-provided community care. I wrote the 4 Steps model for CAMS back in the day when that was published. So this is my background. I think that the aspirations here were right, and I think it was deliverable in terms of service. In theory, there are some questions I would have about the extent to which it was naive in terms of recruiting workforce. Northern Ireland does have some challenges around that, but I think it was with the expectation that there would be a continuation of funding at the level that it had experienced, that the strategy was written to put greater emphasis. And I know the Minister at the time in his forward genuinely, I think, believed, and would probably say he continues to believe, that this was the right thing to do.
Yeah, but there seems to be a trend emanating, it's an issue across departments, but in particular with the Department of Health, when it comes to publishing strategies. Publish great strategies with the best intentions, but they never ever materialise into anything that actually benefits our public. So is it simply a wish list by the Department of Health as opposed to actually a strategy that is intended to deliver and benefit people?
I think that's a really fair challenge. I inherited a number of strategies. They all have merit, and some of them are overtaken by the fact that we want to reset in the way that we do and put our emphasis around developing out-of-hospital services and prevention, because I think that's the only long-term strategic solution to health spending. And by the way, we're not alone in that. This is a feature across the world, this massive increase in demand for health and care spending. But one of the things that I've made clear is that we will be very clear with the public about what specific recommendations we can take forward on an annual basis, so that we are clear about what we can't do, as opposed to allowing everybody to believe everything is possible. And one of the ideas of the planning guidance that we're about to issue is that it will be much more specific about what's doable within the resource. And if you look at the intention that you described before to describe pay, not to describe pay, but to account for pay as a first port of call, which I personally believe is exactly the right thing to do, that's 65 to 68% of our budget. You then have to be very clear about what your 32% that's left can afford, and clear about that. And I think, although it might be difficult in some areas to say this is going to be a time sequence before we can deliver it, it is the right thing to do, to be clear about what we can deliver within the resource available, because it is my duty, despite the fact that you heard some of the things, it is absolutely my duty as accounting officer to live within my means.
Yes. What I'm hearing is, and not to put words in your mouth, Mike, by no means, and you can correct me, the strategy was probably over-ambitious in terms of what it was intended to do, and not entirely realistic in what was possible within the financial restraints that existed in Northern Ireland PLC, if you like. The other challenge here, and the concern I have, is that Northern Ireland departments, executive departments, have a habit of creating an expectation with some of these very glossy, attractive strategies that do attract headlines in the moment, but leave people very upset and disappointed in the long term. And that's exactly, there was a great hope for this strategy. It created significant expectations. There was costings applied to it, which doesn't always happen when you look at Bengoa and other things. So you can understand how, and I hope you agree with me, that this strategy has created an expectation from our public that many problems that face mental health services would be resolved, and indeed the consequences of not acting and the pressures that mounted on our community and voluntary sector as well.
Yeah, I think it was ambitious. I think I'll come back to it. I think in the financial context of its time, it probably did not look unrealistic to assume that it would be affordable over 10 years with that increase in funding. I think your general point about setting out expectations for the public is a legitimate one. The one thing that I would tell you is that, and my colleagues to right and left will perhaps be able to give examples of that, is that there is still a very, very strong commitment to achieve improvements in mental health care. And, we are working flat out to do that. And perhaps we have to be more creative about that we do that. But as I say, the commitment that we're discussing to spend as a higher proportion of our total spending on mental health may well be a way to release additional resource to support the implementation of this strategy.
Yeah, And I do appreciate that, and also that the 1.2 billion spread across 10 years should have been achievable. Is it simply the case that mental health services just not been a priority for the department, given that only 12.3 million has actually been invested?
So it's hard for me to comment in hindsight. I believe that people genuinely see mental health as a priority area. When you look at health services everywhere, you'll probably be aware of the phrase that often very used about mental health services, which are their Cinderella services. Most of the power tends to be around large physical services, highly specialised services. If you look at soft power across a health service, if you look at funding levels for different aspects of health, physical and social and mental tend to lag behind physical health need. I think that is an error. I think you can evidence-base the fact that if you don't fund mental health services properly, you'll get additional demand, not just in health, but in the other services. Tried to cover that in my opening remarks. So whatever has been the intention in the past, which I couldn't speculate on, what I can assure you is that in moving forward, we don't see mental health as a second or third order priority. Indeed, we want to spend, as I say, more on that, because we believe it will help us manage some of the challenges around physical waiting. But more importantly, it will help other government departments, because if we can provide the ambition we have in this mental health strategy, it should reduce reoffending, it will help with educational attainment, it will certainly help with social cohesion, ending violence against women and girls. We know a lot of that is driven by underlying mental health problems. So if you're asking me to comment on the past, it's hard. If you want me to comment on the future, it's not. This is a priority going forward.
I appreciate you saying that, Mike, and I've no doubt, given your life experience in this particular area, that that is a well-intended statement. You'll forgive me for saying that others who had the privilege of holding your role has said similar things in the past, and the concern I have about the public service, the civil service, the public service at the minute, is that we hear this all the time, but it doesn't actually deliver any tangible benefit to the public, particularly in this area.
Could I just say that the one thing that I would say in my defence of my ambition here is the two things that, first of all, we have a reset plan that is in place, which is designed not just to effectively be rhetorical, it is the practicality of how we would do that. And the planning guidance we will issue will confirm in terms of resource and commitment to priorities that this is clear, but I do accept that others may well have had the same ambitions.
Play devil's advocate a wee bit. Is it a reset plan or a retreat plan?
Retreat plan? Retreat plan? No, not at all. Look, I started this year with a £600 million deficit. That's what I inherited. We can't carry on asking Northern Ireland to spend more and more of its money on health and care. I have worked with the other permanent secretaries to understand that the only way that we will be able to manage this is to make sure that health and care spending is adding value, and that requires us to work collectively. Moving money into prevention, moving money into earlier intervention in neighbourhoods, standardising our pathways, really making sure that our clinicians follow evidence-based medicine, using the data, which Northern Ireland has the best data platform in the world in terms of targeting the resource now where it needs to be. The two universities in terms of innovation research, we should have, and I said that, and I'll say it again here publicly, Northern Ireland could have a world-leading health system.
And it should have.
I believe so.
The further question I have, Megan, I appreciate your being forthright with us. I outlined at the beginning of the session members' concerns regarding the pace of delivery against the recommendations of the PAC report. As the committee considered the most recent MOR update on the 9th of October, the deliverability review was published. It is not clear how this will impact on delivery against the recommendations of the PAC report. So can you provide members of this committee with an update on the delivery and an assurance that there will be no further delays? Can you give us that absolute assurance today? Because our public are watching this, people that work within the sector are watching this, and they're hopeful that this moves at a much swifter pace, because 18 months down the line, I really don't see much change from the commitments we were given.
Okay. Heather, would you like to sort of comment on the deliverability?
I will, Chair, thank you. So I think it's important to say that the findings of the review of deliverability absolutely support the recommendations of this committee. For example, it highlighted, just in a very transparent way, the lack of funding that has gone into mental health services, and this committee had obviously highlighted that in its recommendations. In addition to that, it's very clear that the priorities identified in the review, so for example, the focus on workforce, the focus on crisis, and when I say workforce, I need to emphasise that that also includes the role of the community and voluntary sector, because we see them as a key part of the mental health workforce in Northern Ireland. So focus on those areas as the immediate priorities, together with a subsequent focus on CAMS, a focus on trying to remedy inequity across the system through the regional mental health service. These all echo the recommendations that this committee made, and so in taking forward the review, we are in fact taking forward your recommendations. And then other recommendations that this committee made, which were not highlighted in the review, will be taken forward in any case because, for example, they relate to areas that already have been receiving, albeit a small amount, of recurrent funding, and so that work will continue. We are not going to take away funding from those areas which are already receiving less funding than the original strategy envisaged. And in other areas, we now have staffing resources in place, and so they need to continue to do their work, for example, on outcomes, so that's really important. And then thirdly, there are other areas, so for example, the committee's recommendation in relation to right care, right person, that will happen in any case, and so we will take that forward. So I think in general the findings of the review support the direction that this committee was heading in.
Yes. Okay. Just further to that, and you've touched on a number of them, but recommendations 1, 2, 8, 10 and 15 specifically, the PAC recommendations, they remain live commitments by the department following the deliverability review. Could you just confirm that for us, or have any of those been deferred or deprioritised?
So if you just go through them, recommendation was a review of deliverability, which we have undertaken. Yeah. That's been produced in October 2025, and we will, through the delivery plan that we will produce for 26-27, start to take those forward. There are pieces of work that we can do in the absence of receiving additional money on workforce. And so we will obviously prioritise those, but if additional money is found for the strategy or for a reprioritisation within the department, well then those are the areas that have been identified that we will put that to. So we're very committed to that, and in addition to reviewing the deliverability of the strategy, I think it's also important to make the committee aware that we are working really, really closely with the All Departmentals official group and the Executive Working Group on Mental Wellbeing, Resilience and Suicide Prevention, to raise awareness that mental health is something that all departments have an interest in and can impact, and we want to secure their cooperation in terms of taking some of this forward. Recommendation 2 related to workforce. And there are a number of actions that we've been taking forward here. So the committee's recommendation was to implement that workforce review that was published back in July 23. And we indeed agreed an implementation plan in December 24. And we decided that in the context, the most important thing that we could focus on were the first 3 recommendations. So costing what a mental health workforce should be, creating a service prioritisation framework so that we could work out which areas of the mental health workforce do we need to focus on first, and then also building in and integrating more closely the community and voluntary sector into our delivery. And so there were two ways to take all of that forward. We brought in an associate to produce a costing and prioritisation report, and that report has just come into the department before Christmas. It's very detailed because it rebases the workforce numbers from that July 2023 report. And so that needs to be quality assured and checked. But very significantly, it gives us a new mechanism, so a multi-criteria decision-making framework to help us and the service more broadly prioritise how we go forward. So it gives us a structured way to do that, using weighted criteria, looking at need, impact, how we deliver value and delivering impact. Deliverability, sorry, and we can use that now to prioritise how we take that forward in a very, very structured way. And there have been other developments, such as, for example, we've been able to put in place a Chief Psychological Professions Officer who started in the department in March, initially on a 2-year interim basis. And Dr. Rooney's role is to come up with a framework for the whole raft of psychological professions that we have in the mental health workforce, so that we can utilise that capability to its optimum effect and start to introduce more skills mix into workforce discussions. And obviously we also have mental health practitioners in the new MDTs in primary care, and we're starting to see that they're making a difference as well. So there are, I could go on, there are lots of things being taken forward in relation to workforce. Chair, am I answering your question? Do you want me to go back?
You're touching slightly on the question that Diane will be raising with you shortly, so you can hold it there, but it's fine. You've covered a fair amount of what I was focused on. Just before I pass over to Diane, and I do appreciate your answers so far, the department, some elected reps last week on the radio, or at the beginning of this week, were talking up the £300 million of efficiencies made by the Department of Health. So you can understand when you hear about 300 million of efficiencies being made, and then you hear that there's very little being invested in mental health to the same degree that was promised or committed to. Those two statements don't align with each other, do they? Really?
The whole issue about starting a year with a £600 million deficit, which may well be greater going into next year, depending on the budget when it's finally settled, is that balancing my duty to live within our means at the same time as improving the outcomes of service. And what we've tried to do, I think we were very clear, by the way, from the beginning of the year about what was affordable and what we would attempt to do. We have a system financial management group which is looking at efficiency rather than savings. So this is effectively trying to look at every pound that we spend. We're now into looking at effectiveness. And the thing that I would say, Chair, is that Northern Ireland does spend more per head of population on health and care than other jurisdictions. Although I think that this coming year, this will actually dip under some of the other jurisdictions. But even then, we're still up at that level, but we're not getting the same outcomes. And so the point is that we have to look at effectiveness, but we also have to live within our means and try and balance our budget. So the £350 million of efficiencies are aimed at taking cost out in a technically efficient way, but also supporting allocative efficiency so that you can improve the care that people get. And that might sound like you are in contradiction, but I do believe that we could evidence where we have made efficiencies that have not compromised the service. And I think we can show how, if we did the reset in the way that we would hope, it will give and improve the effectiveness of the way that we use the money that we have. And look, this is a constant tension. We are battling, you would like us. This committee produced a report on GP access. This committee, we had at the same week, the Health Committee's report on palliative care. All of those are saying if you could spend a little bit more money here, we can get better value, or just saying you get a better service. But we only have so much money, and that will depend on what the Assembly eventually give us.
Yep. I sort of agree with what you've said, Mike, but equally as well, we're throwing good money after bad because we're not implementing the strategy that was committed to and costed. And the whole purpose of that strategy, a phrase that was used quite a lot by MLAs, was invest to save. Invest in the system to save in the long term. A preventative measure. We're not doing that. We're throwing good money after bad, and that is the issue. And the reason why the service is not as effective as it should be, even though we're spending more per head than other jurisdictions, is because we aren't following a proper strategy. That's the issue at the core of this. And by not going, so we're in a retreat situation right now because we're walking back from the strategy. So I'm really concerned about the costings in the long run and the implications of that for our public, particularly those impacted, which many are in relation to mental health services.
I've agreed with most of what you said, but I don't fundamentally agree with that last point, that this is a walking backwards. The only way that you will effectively get better money, get about better value for the money that we have, is by following the reset plan. Because the reset plan moves to try and prevent additional costs of people who deteriorate because we didn't get to them early enough. The neighbourhood model, I think, has got evidence from across the world. There are places like New Zealand, Sweden, Spain that I could point to which have followed similar strategies and been able to demonstrate how they can manage their budgets better than we have previously. Had we not published a reset and I'd have said we are simply doing what we've always done and trying to make savings, I would have said that's a fair criticism. But the whole point of reset, not retreat, is that it is the vehicle by which you are going to be able to afford the level of public services that the people deserve within the resources that we have available at this time.
Thank you. I'll pass on now to our Vice Chair, Diane Forsyth.
Thank you, Chair, and Mike, Heather and Ciara, thank you very much for being here. Back in early 2024, this committee agreed that the mental health services was our #1 priority. It was the first inquiry that we came together and held. Such was the strength of feeling on that. We united right across the committee on picking it. And as constituency representatives, it's something that, you know, means a lot to all of us. Access to mental health services, it's such a serious thing. And, you know, I know myself that whenever people are coming to their local MLA looking for support to access mental health services, it's never in a good situation, be it, you know, parents over their child who can't access services, you know, for a young adult who hasn't received a diagnosis during school and is struggling with the pathways, or an adult who cannot access the services, people being deemed as in crisis and immediate danger, yet being told it's a 6-week wait to actually get the services that we have to provide to you. It's terrible, and the outcomes are absolutely catastrophic. It's heartbreaking, and you know, many lives have been lost. It's just been devastating for families, such as the severity of it. And I just wanted to make sure that we're bringing the people and the humanity of this into this today. And just in terms of the access to services, as constituency reps, as public representatives, whenever we're dealing with people and we have that devastation, that frustration, it's difficult to see any improvement from where I'm sitting as a constituency representative, and I'm not an expert on it. So I just want to ask you, is there any evidence of improved access to services being delivered through this strategy to date, to be able to convey that to the public here in Northern Ireland?
Shall I start on MDTs? Because MDTs now, even though they're still relatively young, we have mental health practitioners now based in those MDT practices where that has been put in place. And so, you know, we've got about 71 mental health practitioners in there, and the evidence that we're getting from those practices is that 55% of patients who utilise our services are held there and don't need to be referred on. But if they do need to be referred on, they're mostly referred to the community and voluntary sector, or alternatively into statutory if that's what their need is. So there's a very practical example of where at this current point in time, with the level of MDT provision we have in those areas, there should be an obvious improvement, and that's obviously going to be rolled out over the course of the next few years. We've also got the Mind in Your Head website that the Public Health Agency hosts. Is a really, really good source of information and direction. There are apps on there which people can use, and I know the PHA has been working on a refresh of that and to try and raise awareness of it, so that there's much more easily accessible help and support for someone even in their own home, so that there's more there than there was. So that's sort of at that sort of general level. And then in terms of the statutory side and community health provision, there's more.
I mean, we have invested a lot in early intervention and prevention services for children and for adults to reduce the need for people to present in crisis or to present to community mental health services, and we are beginning to show great success with some of those services, but that at the same time doesn't take away from, we do have challenging weights for mental health services, for psychological therapy services, and some weights for CAMHS, which reflect workforce availability, not always funding, but availability of some of the key professions. We can't recruit them, that's a UK-wide problem. So we are in a very challenging position. And we accept that, and we accept the challenging financial position we're in. We accept that we have a society whose mental health is poorer than people who live in the UK. We appreciate those very challenging circumstances that we face. So the mental health clinicians, the workforce, community and voluntary sector right across, I mean, we've adopted what can we do? How can we make this better? And it is about addressing inequality, making sure early intervention prevention services are immediately available, working with schools, with GPs, with teachers, with parents to make sure that all of the building blocks of good mental health are in place for children. So whilst we might not see benefits today, our hope is that we will begin to build benefits as we go forward.
And would there be any reference within your work to the regionality of that in terms of barriers to access to services in rural areas? I represent the area of South Down. It's very rural, and quite often people who are in crisis or trying to access mental health services do not have the capability to transfer across 2 to 3 buses to travel an hour and a half for their services. Has there been any improvement in terms of that, or consideration to that regionality and rurality?
I'll let you then I'll add something.
No, I mean, I suppose one of the, probably one thing that we learned from COVID was when people weren't as easily able to access face-to-face appointments, or the usefulness of being able to access appointments over Teams or Zoom, or being able to use phone appointments, which maybe wouldn't have been the first port of call prior to COVID, but something that we learned during COVID. So that's an area, the whole area of digital mental health is something that we are very much working towards. One of the focuses out of the deliverability strategy that the PAC had reflected as well was about the development of regional crisis services and accessible crisis services, and I mean that is our, alongside workforce, those are our immediate priorities going into this year, and it is about standardising access to mental health liaison and crisis response home treatment. I'm very much addressing the issues of rurality. It is a particular challenge in the West and the South. It is, there's no getting away from that, and that continues to be an area of our focus, but we're doing that in line with how we can squeeze as much benefit as possible from access to digital solutions.
And just one of the things I'd like to give you one thing that we established with some months of me arriving is what we call a committee in common. Mm-hmm. And the committee in common means that all the trusts have a subcommittee, but those subcommittees meet at the same time. They can take a single paper and make a decision on behalf of, they make a decision that goes back to their own trust boards for the final decision, but the point being that it allows you to take a decision about distribution of services rather than each advocating for their own service, in the sense that, and psychiatry is one of their topics that they're discussing, the distribution of psychiatric services in terms of supporting that being a consistent service across the whole of the Northern Ireland patch.
No, that's great, and with it being a constituency where I have a crossover of trusts within mine, and it is, it's a very prevalent thing, and it's good to hear that. My next points are around the waiting times. At the time of our previous session, the committee was advised of significant breaches around waiting time targets on adult mental health services, dementia services, CAMS, and psychotherapy. And I just wonder if you could outline the current position in respect of these targets and whether there have been any improvement in the waiting times.
You want to pick that up?
Ciara. Well,
Ciara. Sorry.
No, you're absolutely fine. And I think one of the challenges in answering that question is about Encompass, the implementation of Encompass, and the trusts are still moving their mental health services onto Encompass. So whilst we have performance data and management data available about the waiting lists that are in existence for all the services, it isn't validated to the extent where the trusts are in a position to publish it with high confidence.
Whenever they're rolling out to Encompass, and this kind of came up in our session as well, this is so important that we understand the detail of the waiting list for access to mental health services. And for anything else, anything I've ever worked on, in previous jobs, you'll always run dual systems to be able to have that rather than just lose the data, in the face of the transition. Did you have dual records in terms of whenever you're moving across to Encompass, do you not still have sight of that?
We do, and to reassure the Chair and the committee, the data isn't lost. It's just not validated to the extent where we're confident in publishing it. I mean, to give you an example, the Southern Trust recently reviewed 4,683 records. They had 10 which they found issue with, therefore they're only reporting medium confidence, not high confidence in the data. So nothing has been lost. And having spoken to the trusts and the Encompass Regional Reporting Group who are implementing Encompass, I think they would want me to make sure that the committee understand the complexity and the extent of what they are doing. This hasn't been done before, and Northern Ireland will be the only place in the UK where you are able to see someone's physical health records, their community mental health services and inpatient mental health services, and have immediate access to that real-time information, and how that is going to be an absolute game changer for clinicians in terms of the quality of their work and the immediate access to that. To step back and to achieve that, it hasn't been done before, and mental health services aren't sort of linear services the way physical health ones would be, where you go back every 4 weeks to see how you're getting on. Mental health services have multiple entry points. When you're in there, they have multiple specialist services, and we need to build a computer system that can match a patient journey, particularly in mental health, where people will engage and, they'll engage, they'll withdraw, they'll be referred to specialist services, they'll perhaps be accessing crisis services. So for us in the centre to come back to the committee to talk about outcomes and data, we need to be 100% sure that what they're measuring in the Belfast Trust, South Eastern Trust, Southern Trust along that patient journey is exactly the same. England are about 14 years ahead of us in terms of mental health outcomes, and we have been guided by them in terms of how they implemented an outcomes framework. And the one piece of advice they have reiterated again and again is that you put something in place, you make sure it works, you make sure it's being delivered consistently, and then you move on to something else, and that you don't whole scale introduce a raft of measures, because you ultimately end up with data that's not reliable or valid and can't be used for benchmarking. So that's the approach that we have taken. We're on track for the timeline of the performance data being in place for June 26. The Regional Reporting Group have been up and running since December 24, and they are going through each of the metrics as they go along, making sure they're confirmed, consistent, report it on, and then they're moving on to the next one.
Can I make a point about waiting times? Because I think this needs understood, which is that your waiting times is a measure of stock and flow, and it is entirely possible that we might have a higher level of demand, people being added to that. We improve the amount of activity that we're doing, but the waiting list still increases. And this is one of the reasons why prevention and management. So I would like to give this committee at some point in the future a sense of not just those bold waiting times, whatever. It's what are we doing to get ahead of that to effectively manage demand? Because we know that demand for mental health services is increasing, and how are we dealing with that? But as a general point, I would say that we really do know that waiting time has an impact on outcomes for care, and so we sees the fact we need to get our waiting times down, but it might be that we get better benefit from investing in prevention to allow the capacity we've got to deal with the people who are waiting, rather than focus on more activity. I would say you need a balance of those approaches.
Thanks, Mike. And I think that, I fully appreciate the complexity of this, and it sounds like Encompass gives the potential that you probably will be able to gather a wider range of data and maybe use it better, in mapping the journey. But going back to my previous point as to current and, existing waiting times and waiting lists and whether or not there's Encompass, surely there's some sort of data that can be published here and now around the waiting times for comparability across the board, rather than it feels to us in committee a bit like the department's hiding behind the term of Encompass as to say we can't publish waiting lists, because we know these waiting lists exist and people deserve to know what they look like and what they look like right across Northern Ireland. Is there nothing that can be published?
I think that's a fair challenge. We have made strides around elective care, as you know, with the work that we're doing to look at that with an elective clinical leader and that. I think going back to the point about is this a priority, does it have equality in terms of its experience, we will look at how can we make sure that we are making more data available.
Are you going to publish any
I think
numbers?
On MyCare, do we not have through MyCare?
Through MyCare.
We're not sure. We'll get back to you on that.
Yeah,
But
it would be something I think that the committee just collectively would like to see, and I think the public deserve
I may be doing us a misservice, but we will absolutely look at the point that you've raised, because I think it's a very good one.
Yeah, thank you. And just, I think Daniel had sort of begun with Heather on my final point. It was just around how the deliverability review would improve waiting times and access to services. I think you sort of touched on it. Was there anything more on that?
In terms of just our focus on service prioritisation, and
how that actual review will improve the waiting times.
Well, I suppose if we focus on workforce and prioritise the services within that, so that we fill and maximise the workforce that we have, well then we will be able to start to see an impact on that. The early intervention and prevention work will continue alongside that, and I think as colleagues have said, that will also help to deal with people and help people to contain their issues at an earlier point, and then that stops the demand from escalating.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Padraig Delargy, but Padraig's joining us remotely.
Thanks, Chair. And look, I think there's been so many questions so far. Really, for me, the key point is, I suppose, going to recommendations 7 and 9, which is really just to try and understand better, the fact that when people aren't treated in a timely manner, that obviously worsens their health outcomes. It increases the impact on them. So, what I would really like to understand is what early interventions can be put on here, but also what early interventions can be done to ensure that going forward, even if the reality is at the minute we have longer outcomes and worse outcomes, but what early interventions can be put in place to actually try and support people immediately when they become involved in health services.
I'll maybe take Project 7 was in relation to, I suppose the committee were very concerned about the number of referrals that had been made to CAMS services that hadn't been accepted by CAMS, and we'd gone back to the committee, we've reviewed over 6,000 referrals into CAMS, and 53% of the ones that had not been accepted were really not appropriate referrals for CAMS and should have been directed back to the community and voluntary sector, back to an alternative service within the trusts. So the learning that we have taken from that is that whilst there is a working together, a referral pathway for children's mental health services, obviously people weren't fully sighted on it, or those referrals would have perhaps gone to the correct place the first time. So in addressing that, all the trusts' referral coordinators have made sure that has been reissued to our biggest referrers, and the emotional wellbeing teams in schools have taken on to make sure that schools are fully sighted on where you access support for children at the earliest point whenever they need it. So I mean, they've produced a report at the end of last year. They've had great success. They've been in 70 secondary schools. They've engaged with thousands of children and hundreds of teachers, making sure that they know where they can access support. And I suppose one benefit of that has been that the Youth Wellness Hub has had an increase in, kids that have accessed that has increased to 20,000 last year. So we're obviously helping children be directed to the correct place. In terms of broader early intervention and prevention, I mean, it's a family of responses, a lot within the community and voluntary sector, yes. A lot.
Yes. PHA is funding a lot of early intervention and prevention work, and a lot of it is actually directed at children and young people. And so, for example, they have mental health awareness training programs delivered by Mindsets delivered by Action Mental Health, and that's aimed at 14 to 17-year-olds. We've got a program called Mood Matters, which is delivered by Aware, and there are lots of others. There are targeted prevention services which are aimed at young people who are at risk of drug and alcohol issues. There's a youth engagement service in each trust aimed at 11 to 25-year-olds. Ciara mentioned the emotional health and wellbeing framework that we have in partnership with DE. And that's a really powerful mechanism for engaging young people very early to understand emotional and mental health issues. And that is attracting £5.6 million this year, which is not included in that mental health strategy funding envelope. So that's additional resource which is going into that really important area. And about half of all schools in Northern Ireland are engaged with that in some way, those 6 projects. So it's a really valuable addition to what we're doing.
Again, just to make one very quick point, this is more in the general population, but if you look at what keeps us mentally well, it's someone to love, somewhere to live, something to do. It's very simple. The Department of Health does not control access to some of those, which is why, and I know this committee is very strong in terms of cross-government working, we have been really clear about talking about health being a horizontal budget, where effectively it supports things like reducing economic inactivity, avoiding reoffending, improving school attainment. But the quid pro quo is that our colleagues work to support families in those early years and indeed adults around those 3 components. Because if people have that, all the evidence is that their mental well-being is much stronger and fit. So this isn't, we take responsibility as a lead department, but preventing mental health is a wider issue for all departments.
Okay, so there's a huge amount on there, and for me, the community and voluntary piece is one that I would have definitely a slightly different opinion on, in that I look at the community and voluntary sector in Derry, and rather than supporting the work of the trust and of statutory services, they're actually stepping in and doing the work that is expected and that I would expect as an elected representative of statutory services. So the community groups that we have in our area are the only point of access that many young people have, that many adults have, that most of our community have to these health services, because they can't get in. They can't get in the door, and they're consistently told, that they can't get in, they can't access CAMS, the waiting list's too long, they're going to be stuck in that cycle. So the only support they're getting is from our community sector. So I appreciate that the aim of the community groups is to try and, I suppose, get a bit downstream, to try and support people in communities, to try and ensure that there is that community support, and that's absolutely the aim. But the reality on the ground is that they're doing the work of community groups, but they're also doing the work of statutory services as well. And that's where I have a slight problem, in that they're picking up the pieces for the fact that the statutory services aren't working. Yep. So they're not meeting the raison d'etre, because they're actually having, they're stretched so thin, and they're actually quite often, and I don't think in the instances that you've mentioned, because I do recognise that you're bringing real opportunity and support here, but I do think that they're quite often, for many government departments, an afterthought, and that's where I have a lot of difficulty in terms of how they're supported locally.
So I just want to take issue slightly with you, Padre. If they are in place instead and try and provide the statutory level of service that you would get with professional expertise, that shouldn't happen, and we should be funding more, and that would be an issue. It's also quite dangerous. But where I take issue with you is the reason that the CAMS model is step model. It's that first layer of intervention is generic health professionals, generic professionals, whether they're teachers, youth workers, community workers, identifying situations early. You want to try and keep people away from statutory services, despite the fact that we've made massive progress on managing stigma over recent years. You really don't want, if people can avoid a mental health diagnosis, that has consequence. And so the role of voluntary service is not, I would argue, a substitute, but it is a massively important first port of call. If you look at places like Wigan and the work they did around the Wigan deal, what they were able to demonstrate is by really supporting their voluntary sector to intervene early, they reduced the total expenditure on social care, they improved the number of people who were reporting to A&E departments with alcohol-related harm, they started to see coronary heart disease prevalence reduce. So I don't accept completely, although I know what you're saying, that actually we shouldn't be thinking about the voluntary sector as a first port of call. But we do need to fund it, and we do need to make sure, I would say, that we can get added value by having longer contracts with our voluntary sector as a matter of process, because very often, as you know, I know you'll know this, they're often chasing next year's contracts and all the rest of it. So I wouldn't quite share your whole point there. I think there is real merit in the first port of call being community, being people as partners, supported by peers, and then if that isn't able to deal with the problem, then you start to look at statutory and more professional engagement, perhaps which is more biomedical in character. So, I'll take your point to a part.
Can I add to that, because obviously this was a recommendation from this committee about how we might better integrate the community and voluntary sector into our provision, and we're really committed to do that. We brought EY in to do a really focused piece of work with community and voluntary sector colleagues to look at their scope, their capability, the capacity that they would have to do that. And that report has just been cleared by the Minister, and it'll be published very, very soon. It has some really interesting information in it. For example, the level of funding that trusts provide out to the community and voluntary sector under contract to do particular pieces of work. But it also talks about the barriers that need to be overcome in order to really optimise the potential that they have. And it's things like streamlining the procurement processes to make things as easy for them as possible. It's about inviting them to training opportunities so that we're upskilling them in the same way that we upskill the statutory workforce, to see them as genuine partners in relation to that, to look at how we might have more equitable funding across the trusts, because there is a disparity at the moment, and how we can engage them more, and particularly those steps 1 and 2, because that's what they're really good at, and that's deliverable in people where people live. So just to support what Mike has said.
And sorry, Padraig, if I could just come in. I managed CAMS for a long number of years, and certainly, the community and voluntary sector and statutory sector, when they complement each other, that's whenever people have the best experience, whenever children and young people have the best experience, and they should be complementary to each other and not a replacement for each other. Because, when your involvement with the community, when your involvement with CAMS is complete, you'll be in your community, and you'll be engaging with those community and voluntary sector services that are in your area. So it's in everybody's interest that all parts work and complement each other well, because that's what's going to work best for children and families.
No, and I agree with that. I think the difficulty that we face, and I'm sure everybody here faces, is every week we get people in who may try and access CAMS when they're 16. They're then put on a waiting list, and when they turn 18, they're taken off that waiting list, and they have to start again. So the community and voluntary sector has been their only port of call, their only support. So I absolutely agree that that those should complement each other, that they should be working in conjunction. But the barrier to those young people isn't from the community and voluntary sector. It's from statutory services, and that's where I have a real issue. We did, as you know, I chair the all-party group on mental health, and we did a report, I think about a year and a half ago now we launched it, and to trying to provide a better framework for mental health in schools. So I appreciate you've kind of done quite a lot of work with secondary schools, but for me, this is something that actually needs to be on the curriculum. This is something that needs to be, used throughout schools, and actually for there to be a development and a clear curricular progress through this as well. Because I worked in schools that did a great job, and I also worked in schools that didn't do such a great job. So it's trying to build that baseline, I suppose. Uniformity would be the wrong word, but at least a baseline for where schools should be providing that support. And obviously, if schools want to go above and beyond that's great. But we had fantastic groups who came into some of our schools, but they might only have been funded for 6 weeks. And by the time the young people got to know them, they had to leave again because they only had 6 weeks of funding. So that's what I mean about the sort of cyclical process that in my opinion, doesn't work because it's not carried out over a long period of time. The relationships can't be built, and therefore you don't have progression. You could have the same information every year because they don't have the funding and the sustainability to do it. So, I welcome the progress. I think there's an awfully long way to go. But for me, this will never be resolved until there's a curricular agreement and there's actually something in place on the curriculum in schools, because that's the best way of doing this.
Great, we'd agree.
You're looking in?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up to that very important issue that Padraig's teasing out there, and in light of your remarks around how massively important that sector is. But the elephant in the room is that as we speak, there are application forms going out with slashes to the local growth fund. A tsunami that started with Brexit but is now washing up right here, right now, today. Do you have an assessment? I note that that recent EY Ernst Young scoping exercise. Do you have an assessment of what the impact will be on those groups or on the work they're doing, as you say, to divert them away from statutory health services?
So I'll let Heather answer on the EY bit if we can, but just to make a point that when you look at each of the government departments and their relationship with the voluntary sector and the resource that goes in, I think there is an opportunity to really add value in the way in which we coordinate income into the voluntary sector. There are areas of duplication and there are areas of gap which people assume someone else is doing. So I just think that the opportunity, I think Northern Ireland has a very strong voluntary sector in my experience compared to other countries. It's a great asset that we have and we need to exploit it further. So I'm not sure of what the EY report said, but
do you have concerns with what's happening currently, and do you have any assessment of what the impact of that might be on yourselves?
So I don't have the figure on me in terms of what the percentage of funding that community and voluntary sectors get from government, but it is significant and it will be in that report which is published. And so we would be concerned about any diminution of funding that's going to that sector, because they are such key partners. They need to be part of a neighbourhood solution to tackling mental health, and so we will do everything within our power to support them to do that. And obviously the amounts are different, but the core grant scheme at the moment, there's a mental health strand within that, and that's currently applications have come in for that. That process is now underway, and the results of that, the outcomes will be known next month, and hopefully that will enable some support to be given to those organisations. But obviously we're concerned about any wider reduction in funding.
Thank you.
Okay. Patrick? Okay, just to touch on a slight point, just for clarification purposes, Mike. Is the department concerned that delays in access are resulting in people presenting with more acute and complex needs by the time they are treated? With poor outcomes and increased costs in providing health and social care to support these struggling the most?
Right. I'm deaf to post.
Sorry, it's a Strabane accent, actually. Is your department concerned that the delays in access are resulting in people presenting with more acute and complex needs by the time they're treated? Padraig touches very well on a number of these aspects, but specifically, has this led to poor outcomes and increased costs in providing health and social care to support those who are struggling the most? So the delay is costing more and leading to poor outcomes.
So I think the validity of a sense that we have more acuity is largely anecdotal, because people will say we have more. So I'll give you an example of the recent period of time. It's not a mental health example, but we've seen an increase in the number of fractures that have come into our services recently, largely, I suspect, as a result of the cold weather and ice and whatever. So we have an increase in demand. It's not always because of added acuity. What you can demonstrate, and the evidence is very clear, that people, as they age, get more and more conditions which they are living with on a daily basis that are what we call multiple morbidity. You'll be aware of this. And so the complexity of dealing with an individual who might present with coronary vascular disease, may also have diabetes, and may also be dementing. And so those individuals, when they present to services, that is very, very challenging for services, as opposed to somebody who just might need managing for coronary vascular disease. So I would agree that we probably are seeing an increase in the level of acuity that we face. And we do know for a fact that the longer you wait for care, because if someone's occupying a bed that someone else is waiting for, that will reduce the benefit of their outcome. That is well known, and that's what we're trying to tackle. I'll come back to it by way of resetting our health and social care system. If we can keep the people out of our hospitals or our secondary services that don't need them, because we intervene early through our neighbourhood or prevention, then you can manage higher acuity within the resources we have.
Yeah. We focused obviously on the mental health strategy is what I was referring to, and the challenge with delays and the system being so broken is that it's very difficult to get an accurate assessment of the actual waiting list, because often, particularly given that people can't see GPs, the emergency departments are a bloody disaster, to be honest. Most people that aren't in a good headspace, if I could use that phrase loosely, the last place they'd want to be is sitting in an emergency department. It's very difficult to determine actually the scale of this. And the delays to waiting lists, I believe, are adding to that, but equally are preventing the department from having an accurate measure of the demand for the service. Would that be a fair enough statement?
I think that's not unfair to say that being able to accurately sort of count this. And I'd make a point as well, Chair, that when you have severe and distressed mental illness and you're in a chaotic state, you are at risk to yourself but also to others. Yes. And so the cost of not managing that by way of trying to keep secure an individual who might be at harm to themselves but frightening other people, for example, in terms of the nursing and in some cases, sadly, security people who have to be involved, consumes a lot of resource that would be available to other people. So the more we can get ahead and manage people not to be in a distressed state, so they might have a mental health problem, but it's being managed because we've got compliance with medication and we're on top of that and seeing them regularly, the least likely they are then to get into a distressed state, which does have a significant impact, particularly on EDs, yeah.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again for your answers so far today. You talked, Mike, in your opening remarks about the strategy being absolutely the right one. Therefore, to measure whether a strategy is actually delivering as it should be or not, we'll have to really measure that against patient outcomes. So can you provide any evidence to the committee today of improvement in patient outcomes as a result of the strategy to date?
I'm not sure we can, but we're building a system to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I appreciate the frustration of the committee with that, but we do have patient outcome measures, not activity data. We have patient outcome measures built into Compass. So the first one is, the universal one is WEMWEB, so that's a wellbeing scale. That's going to be available from your GP on your MyCare app and to your mental health professional. Behind that then we have basically a library of reliable and valid tools which are built into the Encompass system which clinicians will be able to access. We have patient quality measures, which is about your experience of being able to, how were you listened to, were you respected whenever you were dealing with your mental health professional. And then we have a set of personal ones which won't be used for outcome measurements, the likes of the Recovery Star or the Addiction Star, which will help people on their own recovery journey. Which we don't need to have as part of performance data. They are there and they are built into Encompass, but for them to be reliable and valid and useful for us and for patients and for clinicians and teams and trusts to use, we have to get the patient journey built correctly on Encompass first, or else they're not reliable and valid measures that we can use. So we are building it and we're not quite there yet, and I understand the frustration of the committee in the time that it's taken to do that.
When will that be complete?
The activity measures June, and the use of the outcome measures, we are working with Queen's and with the Impact Centre to make sure the governance framework around the use of those is robust, and that's the phase from June to December.
Okay, and will that from the strategy comment from 18 months ago actually, have you any idea of numbers of patients that have benefited actually from the direction that you're taking at this moment in time?
That's a challenging question to answer, because is Encompass able to answer that question for us yet? No. Do we measure the individual level outcome for patients in terms of their interactions with clinicians and how many times they're re-referred into the service and how many times they come back again? Yes, but that doesn't really answer the question about whether mental health interventions are making people better. But when we have these recognised, reliable, valid tools built into a system, we will be able to do that. And we will be able to do it in a reliable and valid way, which allows us to benchmark our services nationally and internationally.
It would be hard, for example, I think it's an important question, and I think our move towards the outcome framework will help answer that. So if we were invited back, we would be able to give you a clear answer. But one thing just to, it would be hard to know how many people we prevented from having a mental health problem that came to our service. But so there is, to a certain extent, a belief that these, if we put these processes into place, they will lead to improved outcomes. But we, again, I'm not comfortable with the idea that I can't answer that as straightforwardly as I'd like, because why would we pursue this if we didn't know that it was going to be added? So we are reliant on process measures that say these interventions have led in other cases to improved outcomes for people. But hopefully by the time we do that for Northern Ireland, we can show that.
And we'll be able to use the outcome measures from, a population level. Health survey tracks individuals' experience of mental health, and we can monitor at that population high level whether mental health in Northern Ireland is improving over time. So that's a sort of a macro way to do it, but it's something.
Okay, thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, folks, for your presentation so far. I just want to touch upon the issue around workforce, and I know the three of you have all referenced it already. I suppose, Mike, you talked about some of the challenges around recruitment, and be keen to tease out from you with your considerable experience, across the UK and so on, about any unique challenges that you feel that Northern Ireland has compared to anywhere else that you have built up within your experience.
Yeah, I think rurality presents a particular problem, and travelling distance into Northern Ireland, because there are sparsely populated areas in other parts of the 4 jurisdictions, but they tend to have transport links that enable things. So rurality is a particular challenge, and the more specialist you get in terms of your experience, so psychiatry as opposed to a community mental health worker, it becomes harder to recruit. That's why when I referenced at the beginning our strategy for reset, including investment in getting inward investment from R&D and linking it, because I have done in the past I've looked at places that could not recruit consultants, and when we worked with a local university to create an initial job that was a clinical academic split, so you had 5 sessions in academia doing research, leading a department or honorary professorial posts alongside a clinical role, you can actually attract very eminent people because they're attracted to an empty space of opportunity to research. And once you get your eminent person in there, what you find is that other consultants will follow because of the reputation of that individual. So that's a strategy that I've used. The other thing that we're looking at, but I'm slightly reluctant in the public domain to give you any kind of degree of certainty that this is possible, is to look post-qualification. We fund, as you know, people to go through education into clinical roles, and they come out. And one of the questions that we're asking is, in return for that, is there a way of steering their early years post-qualification to certain parts of Northern Ireland as a condition? Now, you've got to be careful about human rights, but if we know other countries who have taken a view that if we are funding part of your education, then you have some obligation to be directed to do some early years of your practice in a place that helps us manage need. I actually think you could present that case in a positive way for people, because sometimes when you go into a sparsely populated service, you deal with more complexity, more interesting cases. When you go into a fully staffed area, very often you're lower pecking order and you don't get that experience soonest. So I think there's a something for something deal we could look at, which would help us, in particular, I think, parts of Fermanagh, that kind of area where we are struggling, and the West certainly, yeah, I think, are up for looking at some of these pilots.
Yeah, and you're talking very much across the whole health service, not just the mental health,
not just mental health
on that issue. Yeah, no, I think your points are well made. So I suppose just turning to the other issues around training as well as recruitment of the skilled staff, and that has been highlighted for a number of years, through this committee. I suppose we're keen to establish what has materially changed in the workforce planning, since the committee did report back in June 24, positively or negatively.
We have some stats.
Yeah, we have some stats. So, for example, pre-registration nursing places have increased by 50%. Now, that's not since 2024, though. That's from, a few years before that, to 165. And this year, we've got 6 additional core psychiatry places in. That's out of 26 new medical posts, so that's a significant investment this year into that local grow your own psychiatry workforce. And we've got an extra 10 postdoctoral clinical psychology places, so that's a significant increase in the psychology workforce as well. So there are some developments that have taken place there to give us some optimism.
Okay. And then just finally around this was the deliverability review and the impact that it will have on staff. And I know we've touched upon it earlier in some other questions about the impact it will have on services, but particularly given the ongoing funding challenges, which we're all well aware of. How will that impact on staff and on the strategy?
So the workforce component of that will just help us really focus in on which services we prioritise within mental health. The costing and prioritisation report, which will be published just later on this year when it's finalised, that gives us the tools to be able to do that. And so that was a direct product, if you like, of the review of deliverability. So that will help us prioritise, and then in those areas which are prioritised, that's where we focus our efforts to get the workforce in place.
If I could maybe come in, I mean, we across mental health are looking at, in line with Grow Your Own, how we develop psychological professions, how we have different grades of practitioner psychologists before you hit clinical psychologists, how we use nurse prescribers, advanced nurse practitioners, nurse consultants, how they can support mental health services, again, how we can develop AHPs and social workers to build multidisciplinary teams where we perhaps aren't able to immediately access a consultant psychiatrist. They take 10 years to develop. So how we build a whole multidisciplinary workforce and career development pathways, so that when we do train staff, when we do train newly qualified staff, we can give them a career pathway that keeps them within mental health services and keeps them here within our HSCNI.
Thank you, folks. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah. Some of the responses are extremely well intended, but it's all we will do, we are going to do. And, you know, it's a bit, we need to hear about the here and now and when these things are actually going to be implemented. It's a point of great frustration for me and others. We talk about what we're going to do, and you know, I've heard similar statements to what has been said today as far back as 2020. So, you know, it's we really need to see action follow some of these well-intended statements. That's throwing down the gauntlet to yourself, Mike, in your new role. But it is a challenge. We appreciate it, but the department here just is not moving at pace, to be honest. Diane wants in, and then you can come back to it.
Yeah, thanks. And Mike, I just wanted to pick up whenever you were mentioned there in terms of post-qualification training, because it's something I've been asking some questions around previously, and I think, you know, as Public Accounts Committee, we'd be really, really keen to keep up to date what's happening with that, because in response to me before, you know, the ministers came back to say that through the Department of Health, over £40 million a year is spent by the Department of Health funding university courses in Northern Ireland with no requirement for any of these people to ever work in the Northern Ireland Health Service. So 40 million a year, year on year, getting spent on tuition fees. And we know that a lot of those people are getting their qualifications and going abroad, going to the Republic of Ireland, going to mainland GB, going to Australia. So they're getting their qualifications here at the cost of the Northern Ireland public purse with no requirement ever to work here. Personally, I think that's absolutely criminal against public spending. I've never seen anything like it. You know, I know myself, I worked for it's actually for the Audit office here. I went and worked for them, trained for accountancy, and then I had to work there, you know, for 3 years. And that would be pretty standard on any organisation you work for. I think in the mainstream civil service, there's a requirement in the graduate scheme that you're at least working, you know, within that for a while to repay it back. So yeah. I know in response to me, you had said there's a review of it ongoing. And I think, you know, as soon as possible that some response can be given to that, because I think we owe that, you know, to the people here to show that the investment on the Department of Health in a budget that is so tight, as I say, £40 million a year, it's going into these fees, and these people may never even work in the health service. So if we could be kept up to date, not just in terms of the mental health service, but just because you raised it there in response to Steve, and I'd be really, really keen to.
I mean, it's something that myself and Minister have been very keen to sort of like try and sort of take forward. So you know, and just to comment on, Chair, your comment there, I think we'd be in a worse situation if we weren't well intentioned. But proof of the pudding's in the eating, and you know, we have got this ability to set out in the next few weeks our sense of when we've covered whatever budget we have, assuming that we are clear on our pre-commitments, which may or may not, I suspect, include the ability and the requirement to pay back any overspend, as well as feature pay awards and all the rest of it, and pre-commit to support some of the investor save initiatives that we need. It will be very challenging, but we do intend to make good our words. You know, we haven't come with glib answers or rhetoric today. We've come to be very honest with you about where we are, where we're deficient and where we need to continue, but we're also realistic about the pace at which we can do that depending on where we get with our budget. And I maybe reference to your previous discussion, you know, at no point have I ever intended nor will intend to encourage anybody to overspend.
Yeah, okay. David?
Yeah, I want to look at, thank you for your presentation. I want to look at recommendation 13 and 14. It's around that community and voluntary sector, because one of the things that came out during this, it was nearly 2 years ago now, but whenever we were doing this, was the absolute shocking divide. The department hadn't the first clue what was going on in the community and voluntary sector. So what the recommendation 13 says, there's a review of reliance on to happen from the department and the voluntary, and has that been published?
No, but it will be very, very shortly, because it is finished, absolutely, and Minister has cleared it, and that will be published in the next few weeks.
Okay, that's good. And then the next bit of that was a review of how to best provide funding to that sector. Has that been published?
Do you mean in the wider sense, apart from other than
No, the recommendation said the department is to carry a review of how to best provide funding to the voluntary and community sector.
Well, it's how best, what we're working on is how best to integrate them into mental health service delivery, and that will include, do we contract with them, how do we enable that to happen? So that's part and parcel of that work. How we're taking forward the report, because the report has some recommendations in it. And we are setting up a task and finish group, and that will be jointly chaired by myself and a nomination from the Mental Health Collective, so community and voluntary sector senior leader, and we will take that forward together and put in place a process for taking those recommendations forward.
So is the answer yes then, that review has been done?
No, that would be part of the outworking of this report, because the report recommends that we should find a way to create more equitable funding for the sector. So we need to work through now, how do we do that?
Just a quick one there, in terms of not just funding but influence. In the model of neighbourhood that we're building, which again we will anticipate becoming available from the 1st of April, the voluntary sector is right at the heart of that in the governance, in terms of equal partnership, to be able to deploy the resource that we use in community settings. So I think I would absolutely want you to focus not just on our ability to fund them to make sure they can deliver that, but the influence that we are seeing in the model going forward.
Okay, so recommendation 14 then says expects the department to reassess its engagement. Has that been done?
Yes, and again, it's all tied up with that report that EY did, because we want them to be with us as we make decisions in relation to their role, and how we, for example, commission them to maybe address gaps in waiting lists, what have you. So that the outworking of this report and the task and finish group that will be set up will be the vehicle for that work to happen.
Okay, so the community voluntary, if I look at my own in Lagan Valley, we'll all have examples of groups in our thing. I have a charity that does incredible work in the area, who aren't funded, and they're providing so much support to the health service. So will they be, with this report, are you saying they will be funded, or are groups like it?
So we can't commit to any particular
and not
funding
individual,
model.
take the individual out of it. I mean, the principle of those community.
What funding. We're saying is that we have to enable our community and voluntary sector to be part of the service delivery mechanism in Northern Ireland, and whether that's through core funding, whether that's through contracted arrangements where they're contracted with to deliver certain things, that's to be worked through.
The capacity that they have will be sustained as we go forward.
So.
Which follows on from what Colin said.
It's not just a mental health issue, it's a broad issue, because a lot of our voluntary sector is about cancer, about etc. I think again it goes back to my point about the percentage expenditure within our total budget. So obviously increasing, if I gave you a figure, the point is that we would see the voluntary sector being in receipt of a greater amount as a proportion of our total spend by the end of this kind of multi-year settlement than effectively it is now. So we intend to grow the sector, and we can improve its value through looking at contracting mechanisms.
Intend to grow the community involved
as a percentage of our total spend. Yeah.
Of a percentage of spend. Okay. No, Daniel, I'm.
Yeah. Okay, Colin.
Yep. Thank you. And I'm going to focus on crisis service and systems interfaces, and I know we've touched on that slightly with Darren's question. And just to say that I actually, as part of my training as a social worker and part of my education, had the benefit and the honour of working in one of the crisis teams in the Southern Trust, which was a very, very well put together multidisciplinary team, and demonstrated that benefit that good multidisciplinary working brings. But I suppose I was, and I know part of my question was around how is regional consistency being ensured while pilots continue, and you've indicated part of that. But when will decisions be taken to move from crisis service pilots to permanent regional arrangements?
Thanks for your question, Cathal. I mean, we're working at the minute with the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, the Royal College of Psychiatry, to have regional standards for mental health liaison and for crisis response. And the bits of work that are going on there are about consistent training across all of those teams, CAM's involvement so that we take a lifespan approach. We have some pilots running in Northern and Southern who are taking direct referrals from NIAS. And we have obviously the Hear and Treat up and running and the MAT multi-agency triage teams up and running. Our findings are, they're not due to, those pilots aren't due to complete till the end of March, but I suppose initial findings are that Hear and Treat seems to be taking more referrals and working more effectively than the multi-agency triage is working. So, we're still in the sense-making stage. We're also linking very closely with substance use teams because that used to be a real, that's a challenge, and that working with that co-occurring is a real problem, and also with our personality disorder services because they would be the people who tend to present at crisis most often. So the two networks are up and running. There's a regional oversight group making sure that we have got regional operating procedures, and that's really where that's at. So
do you have a time frame for when it's going to move to permanent?
Well, I suppose we'll need a bit of time come the end of March just to completely evaluate where we are at in terms of the pilots for Hear and Treat, See and Treat, and the direct referrals from NIAS and the continuing work. So I'll probably be in a better position to answer that question in April or May, and I'm happy to write back to the committee just with the work plan going into next year for the regionalisation of crisis services.
Okay. And I will look forward to getting that information as follow-up. Moving on then to how the deliverability review will affect the delivery of recommendation 12, and that theme around right care, right person. So in recent weeks actually, it's been drawn to my attention that during the severe weather emergency protocols, some of our homeless people who are rough sleeping were being recommended or provided beds in Belfast, which obviously takes them away from their statutory services and also any informal support they might have. So clearly that's not the right place, and they're being moved away from some of the right people. But given, and you've touched on there as well, actually, Ciara, and it's a really important issue around that dual diagnosis. Yeah. And again, in relation to homelessness, recent figures indicated 24% of people who died in the streets as a result of homelessness had mental health issues. I suspect there's also a lot of dual diagnosis there, but that's not even being captured. When I first spoke in our initial report on this, I raised the issue of dual diagnosis and improvements to that service. And the reason I'm raising it here is even within the health service, there's a challenge getting the right person at the right time. At that point, it was indicated that there was a huge interest and there was work being done on that. So I'd like to know, has there been work progressed in that, and what the knock-on impact of this deliverability review will be, and what the effect will be on ensuring that the right person is available?
Okay, so in terms of if I maybe deal with the co-occurrence stuff, and then Heather maybe could come back with where we're at with right care, right person, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. One of the recommendations of the committee was that there would be a person who would deal with this, because you know yourself that has always been historically a siloed area between somebody who's known to mental health services and somebody who is known to substance use services, and you'll understand from your experience working that is going to take a big cultural shift to get people working consistently and working not in a silo and working in an aligned way. So that person, pleased to say, has been in post since May 25, so in for over 6 months now, and working across all of the stakeholders. You'll know that that's homeless services, justice, health, community and voluntary sector, obviously, because they're key in this too. Their work plan has been guided by Scotland, who are more advanced in terms of how they're addressing co-occurring issues. So Health Improvement Scotland have really guided us in terms of how we take this forward. The 5 work streams that are in place at the minute. First one is about early intervention and prevention. You've heard that referenced a number of times today. How we manage the interface and make sure a person gets to the correct service, whether that is community and voluntary sector, mental health sector, substance use, or a joint response of all 3 agencies. How we respond to people in crisis, which you've mentioned. How we build recovery, and how we hit this early in CAM services, and how we make the best use of DAMS practitioners so that we can cut this off before it goes ahead. The priorities that have been worked up in the sector, again, that consistent training approach, timely access, how we make best use of peer support, because that's the most effective intervention, one of the most effective interventions, how we help professionals and people to navigate our system, and again, back to our earlier discussion about data and outcomes and how we measure that, and the fact that you can say 24% were known to health services, but we don't know if that was mental health, substance use, dual diagnosis.
Are you saying that work is protected?
That work is
protected.
Protected, being jointly delivered by ourselves in SPPG and PHA, supported by our policy colleagues, and that person is in post, and that is a protected piece of work.
Okay, thank you. I just want to note the concern around what you are saying there repeatedly around the western and southern areas in terms of workforce. Obviously, both areas. My constituency covers both those areas, and it's very apparent and it's very worrying. And it does need robust planning. Even as you say, were the money there are challenges around the training and the recruitment, and we need robust planning to get ahead of that. Very concerned about that.
Thank you.
Did you right care, right person?
Do you want me to address right care, right person? So that's the very specific policy that the police are seeking to introduce, which would mean that they would pull back from attending those calls where they are not, in fact, the right agency to respond. So it relates to, for example, concerns for welfare. It relates to walkouts, people who are missing from healthcare. It relates to conveyance in certain situations, and also mental health order assessments. So it has been implemented in England and Wales, and the police are keen to implement it here. We have been working in very close partnership with the police and HSE colleagues in order to manage the introduction of that, and the police have agreed with us that there will not be a go live date for that until we're in a position where we can facilitate that. So those discussions are ongoing. Our first focus has been to produce a partnership agreement that is almost finalised, and that will set out the commitment across the whole sector, the ambulance service, fire and rescue service and the police to work together to make this work. We're also working on Memoranda of Understanding, which will contain the practical arrangements for how that will be taken forward, who will do what, clarification of roles and responsibilities, etc. We've already agreed what the governance arrangements will be going forward, what the escalation processes will be if there's a disagreement about who should be the right agency to respond. And there are a number of visits happening at the moment across the water to see how it's working in practice and to learn from the experience there. Some regions adopted it more quickly than others, and we've got a considerable body of learning to draw on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just on the point, I'm glad you answered, because in my experience when I was on the police board, that's the issues we're getting.
Yeah.
Right care, right person. And I mean, I'm glad you're talking about a memorandum of understanding, but we need to see what that is, and the sooner we address that, because it's ambulance service, GPs, it's everybody, and the sooner we tie it down and direct it out of it. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't help, but for now it's not working the way it should be, because it impacts on budgets right across those departments and the south side. So I would like to see that. Now, just on them, you've answered fairly well, but probably my question is, how soon will we see that on the ground in terms of, you've talked about memorandum there.
Yes.
How soon do we see that in progress, and working with partners to deliver on that?
So we're conscious that we need to move with pace, and at the same time the system needs to be ready, and police colleagues do understand that. We have a silver operational group meeting at the beginning of February, and we're going to discuss what a potential go live date will be for that phase 1, which is concern for welfare. But in parallel, we also have a mental health order code of practice which is out for consultation, and that will deal with a lot of the clarification of roles and responsibilities in relation to a different phase of right care, right person. So that will come on stream probably quite soon. We hope to be able to launch that code towards the end of March. And so that will see that responsibility around Article 129 and 130 of the mental health order assessments. Whose role is it to do, what's the police role, responsibility, what's our QIA role and responsibility, what are the forms that need to be in place. It will bring together a range of other guidance documents that are very confusing out there for those who are operating the system. So we've got a couple of strands of right care, right person which are coming to fruition, but I can't commit to a date at this point in time, because it needs to go through the process. We need to have that discussion. We need to make sure we're ready.
It's a big discussion.
It's a big discussion. Yeah.
The good news is I think we're working very constructively with both the government department and also on the ground with PSNI and NIAS, etc. And indeed the fire service being helpful as well, actually.
And I suppose just on behalf of, there's a real appetite to get this right. There's a real appetite to get this right and to make sure that the people who need a response in a crisis situation or in a situation of emotional distress, that's provided by the right person.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan Cahill,
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so quite a lot of questions have been asked, and members. John, have you anything you want to add?
Yeah, just briefly, just to follow up on that as an observation, because I was in the police for many years and saw this culture develop of other agencies saying no, the PSNI feeling they couldn't say no, and when this came right down to the first level of supervision, a sergeant making a decision, it was a fear that if we say no and don't sit and look after that individual all night, if something happens to them, it is us who will be investigated for years, sometimes for manslaughter or for disciplinary stuff when they go through a world of stress. And it was easier to say yes and take your resources off the ground and sit in A&E all night or go elsewhere because you're worried about your own back. And that is a powerful culture, which I don't blame them for because they were thrown over the coals many times.
And what I think we need to do, John, which I think what we're trying to do is effectively put in place the protocols that allow people to do the right thing and protect them. We come back to it. When you look at those individuals in distress states, there are two functions. One is to be able to calm, to understand the nature of the condition that they're experiencing. The other is to offer physical support and safety. We saw this week, sadly, the amount of activity of violence against staff, etc. And that's not just our staff, that's against the police and ambulance staff. So what we're trying to do is give people the right protocol to protect them in doing the right thing.
I think risk has to be collectively shared and not just left with the most junior people who make the fast time decisions. Just to quickly things. Mental health strategy, you say there's an increase in demand for mental health services.
Increase in
demand?
Yeah.
Have we got an understanding of why that is? Because I know you said about things like, but we're actually wealthier than we've ever been. And by the way, I was a food bank volunteer until 6 months ago, so I know there's pockets of real deprivation. But why is mental health demand, why are issues going up at this time?
So I think this is a real live debate, really. If you look at in Northern Ireland's case, it is possible that there is additional need that has been unmet, and people who previously might have thought it was stigmatised will come forward now because it's less stigmatising to come forward and present. I think there is more of an awareness of mental health problems at an early stage, which is a positive thing in terms of people recognising that there might be something other than a mood change or anxiety that they have. I think we also have a very vexed and complex question about diagnosis of young people. And the whole debate about do we underdiagnose or are we about to overdiagnose ADHD as a condition. I've got 4 children. My youngest would define one sort of set of experiences in the way that I would have defined it differently. I'm not going to go beyond that into personal details, but there's a level of defining it as a thing as opposed to just living life.
We're just short of time.
Sorry, John. Yeah.
So my fundamental issue is I sometimes think we need to understand why. Before we fix something, you've got to diagnose what is causing this increase. This then brings me back to this preventative model. And if we talk about cradle to the grave from the very start of the NHS, we need to go right back to just after you're born.
Before that, yeah.
Before that.
Before that.
There's a massive increase in the number of children with behavioural issues coming into schools. Now, strip away all labels of diagnosis, saying statements, official figures. I go round schools and speak to headmasters of primary schools and teachers who have been teachers for 20 years. They tell me in the last 5 years there's been a dramatic change in behaviour of many children. Yesterday's in a school, when I went in, it was in lockdown. One class was evacuated, one child was going in very serious dysregulation. The staff are being assaulted in increasing numbers. I got the figures from the Department of Education. Exponential increases. Members of staff are telling me they're being kicked in the throat. I had a principal who was kicked between the legs, who's fearful of doing their job. Now, Here's an issue we need to actually understand. Why is it that we have in the last 5 years this increase in children with behavioural problems in P1 and P2, who are behind in what other things that they would normally be? So a teacher would say, at the age of 6, I would normally expect a child to be able to do X, Y, and Z. They're now behind that. Now, we need to ask really hard questions, because that's your mental health for the future and the present. What are we going, and is there an issue with, and I'm going to bring this right back to a fundamental thing, I think it's a scandal of our times, the impact on children, I'm not saying all mental illnesses, by the way, but certainly with young brains, about devices. And then, if that is the case, Jonathan Haidt, the anxious generation, our prevention needs to go right back to allowing parents to understand how to bring up children in an era where you're instinctively wanting to scroll through a phone. And then when a teacher says, you can't have a phone in school, the child dysregulates because I need my phone. I need a device. That's the only thing that keeps me quiet. So we strip all this back. What are we doing around parent awareness, training, support, and really dealing with those issues at 2, 3, 4, and 5? Sorry, it's a big question.
You're grand.
Yeah.
I get what you're, but we have to,
I know
it's a strategy. We
yeah.
have to.
But is the strategy dealing with that?
Yeah.
You see, and this is where it's
Yes.
strategy about prevention.
Yes.
Are we stripping it to understand what is the cause of mental health? And second of all, what actually are we trying to prevent?
I suppose we, to reassure you...
Off-piece debate.
No, and I suppose, I don't know that anybody could directly answer your question of why children's behaviour is more challenging now. I mean, your head immediately goes to the impact of COVID on some of those very young children and what it was like being out of social situations for 2 years, which a lot of them were. And I don't know that we can answer that question yet. Certainly I was a CAMHS manager at the time, and the referrals for eating disorders increased 6-fold while we were there. So COVID has had an effect. I don't know that we fully understand that yet, and we may not understand that for years. You'll get no argument, I think, from this table about the use of devices and the impact social media has on children, and I can't wait to see the outcome of what Australia has done in terms of banning access to social media for under 16s. Delighted to hear that that's a debate that's going on in the UK. In terms of early intervention and prevention, I mean, we do try, we do, with the Department of Education, we do provide Sure Start programmes. We invest 26 million a year in 38 Sure Starts, which are there in areas where there is social deprivation, to do exactly what you're describing, which is about interaction, behaviour management. Parenting is hard, and it's how we support people to be able to do that with all of the societal challenges that are around at the minute. I'm not a clinician.
A strategy has to be agile enough to pick up these changes.
And we do. I mean, we do. The early intervention and prevention is lifespan, and it does start with parents, and it does start. There's infant mental health referenced in it. Primary school, the emotional. I mean, I'll not have the opportunity to talk about the emotional wellbeing teams in schools, but I will send the committee through their annual report about the reach and range they have had with parents and kids and teachers, and the impact that's going to have.
I was going to ask what Diana asked. Thank you for that helpful answer. She asked a question about this £40 million, but you don't actually have to promise to stay in and live and work in Northern Ireland. In terms of the health workforce, those who are at, for example, Queen's dentistry and things, a lot of them are overseas students for financial reasons. It's more economically beneficial, and therefore a lot of our Northern Ireland students have to go over to England, and then they stay there. So is that a challenge for mental health workforce in the years to come in terms of, or not?
I think it's a multifactorial issue, John, but undoubtedly that will be potentially the case. That I would argue that you have to be at a particular level because you will pay more to go to England, given the level of fees that we charge in here and the reputation that we have in terms of universities at Queen's and UU. So you would be taking quite a conscious decision to move to England, which might be about relatives or it might be about lifestyle choice.
You can't get
but undoubtedly there will be some people who leave our shores really when we should try and as hard as we can to keep them.
That's me, thank you.
Thank you. That's good. Thanks everybody. Quite a lot of questions there, Mike, and baptism of fire for the PAC for you. So
listen, can I say, Chair, before you finalise, I really welcome this opportunity. Democratic scrutiny challenge is what we should be about, and you know, we are accountable and would want to be accountable. And I will say two things. One, I'd be happy to come back with colleagues to give you a progress report in due course if you felt that we were, you know, not being honest enough. We'd certainly do that. And, you know, this gives power to the PAC always, as the very important committee, gives power to our elbow in terms of distribution of spending and resource. So thank you for your questioning. It's not a problem to be here at all.
Well, thank you to the three of you for being with us and taking questions for just over 2 solid hours. So we do appreciate that, and for the wide range in questions that are there. There's times we digress slightly into other areas, but that's easy to do when the topic at hand is of such importance to us. At the end of the day, beyond this committee, we are constituency MLAs, and we reflect at all times the interests and concerns of the people we are elected to represent. So I know this is a very important issue for us all, personally and publicly. So we do appreciate your answers, and for being quite forthright. I have to say I take some reassurance from your history in dealing with these particular issues, and I hope you do bring those expertise to the important role which you hold, and that we see tangible benefits for our public in relation to this important area. I have no doubt the intentions are good and the focus will be there, but as I said, it's about what we see play out on the ground, and that's why at all times when we do this with all witnesses now, when we hear we are going to do, we are doing, we want to hear when, and when we'll see the benefit of that for the people across Northern Ireland. So with that said, Mike, Heather and Ciara, sincerest appreciation to the three of you for being with us. We do not underestimate the difficult challenges and the tasks that are there ahead of you. But thanks for being with us today, and we do wish you well. We'll reflect on the evidence we've received today alongside the information set out on the table before us, and we'll consider any further information that you'll kindly provide, and we look forward obviously to that document being published at the end of the month as well, and we'll follow up from there. Wish you well, Mike, in your new role. You do have the support of this committee and the difficult job that you have, but we're never shy in holding people to account when it comes to it. But we look forward to seeing you again, undoubtedly we will, and thanks to you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, members, we'll now move into closed session briefly.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.